Dear listeners, previously published a video, wife cheats on husband with multiple partners. Husband gets brutal revenge, cheating wife story part 4. One of our subscriber, Travis Davis, aka Malicious Logic 37, had his own take on the story, and hence here we are with his version. So this video is called, Wife Cheats on Husband with Multiple Partners, Husband Gets Brutal Revenge, Cheating Wife Story Malicious Logic 37 ending. Once again, a huge shout out to Travis, and if anyone wants to have a different take on any of the videos published or wants their story be published, please send us an email. Officer Robin Albin walked through the doors of the Texas Rangers Houston headquarters. She stood at 5 feet 7 inches and weighed 149 pounds, with an athletic build. Her short brunette hair slightly covered her sky blue eyes. Her grandparents were of Polish descent and came to the States during World War II to escape the Nazis. A sense of pride fills her every time she comes through. It was a long time before she would step foot in this building as a Texas Ranger. Ever since she was a child, she wanted to be in law enforcement just like her mother and father. Ever since she was a little girl who wanted to be in law enforcement. She remembers how proud of her parents she was when she saw them help people. Her mom helped bring down a sex trafficking ring that stretched from New York to Texas. Her father took down one of the most notorious crime syndicates in the country. Her parents were her heroes. Until one day when they were returning home from a night out. Her mom meets her at the door while her dad went to the trunk to pick up items from the mall. Her dad, Charles Albin, had the humor that could put a comedian to shame, while her mother, Sarah Eliabeth Albin, had a laugh that could warm the heart of the coldest person and a smile to match. As they were making their way inside the home, Charles noticed a slow van whose window had gone down, the glint of a gun barrel in view. Seeing his reaction, Sarah looked towards 10-year-old Robin, as did Charles. Both parents dove on Robin, shielding her from the bullets that riddled them both. The defining sound of the Uzi cut across the night. When the shooting stopped, Robin worked her way from beneath her parent. She looked at her father, only to see his eyes open, looking into nothing, the bullets in his face and eye evident. She then heard sound from her mother. She held her mother's head, attempting to help her. She screamed and cried for help, anything to help her mother. She saw her mom was conscious. When her mother saw her, despite the pain, she smiled, for she knew her daughter was safe. She lightly brushed her hand across her daughter's face to wipe away her tears. She looked at her and spoke, "We love you, baby." And Robin watched as her mother died in her arms. After the funeral, Robin was sent to live with her grandparents from her father's side, since her mother's had passed years ago. But from that moment, she swore to herself that no one would feel or experience what she did. She would go through school and practice any form of martial art her grandparents would allow. She would play as many sports possible, all while mating her grades. Her grandparents' parents were always there for her for support, but failed to realize she was in fact training her body and mind. At the age of 18, she enlisted in the United States Army and proved to be a natural marksman, and was one of the females in her unit to not only see combat, but to be accepted by the elite Army Rangers. Her skill and commitment to country and unit only grew, and her sniper kill ratio from a woman had not been seen since World War II. When she received her discharge papers at the age of 24, she went into training for the Texas Rangers. In her 5 years of service, she proved to be one of the best Rangers in the state. Finding both clues and culprit is like a mystery novel detective. Her department called her Sherlock or Elementary to both mock and show respect for her attentive skill as a detective. Many lives were saved due to her skill and tenacity, but many a criminal fell to her gunshot. She was leaving for home when she got a call from her captain. Her captain was a legend in not just the Texas Rangers, but in law enforcement. With over 30 years in the force and a veteran of the Vietnam War, he has seen more than his share of combat. She had nothing but love and respect for that man. But it wasn't just because he was the most decorated officer in the state, but the fact that he was there for her ever since she became a Ranger. He had his doubts at first, but he saw something in her that would make a difference. They solved many a case together. From serial killers to arsonists, to assaulters and organized crime, side by side, they fought it all for the people of Texas. He was her mentor and her friend. He asked her to come in tomorrow morning for an important assignment. The moment she stepped inside, she received a text. "Meet me at Dino's." This was important. Dino's was an abandoned building that had a T-Rex sticker on a wall outside. They went there when they had something that had to be handled without attention. When she arrived, she saw the grim expression. Despite him being in his mid-50s, he still had an intimidating and lean body. Not to mention he could pass as someone in his 30s. Captain Xavier Davis, a man standing at 6 feet 3 inches at 216 pounds. Despite him now being behind a desk for the most part, he was still more than able to put the hurt on someone. To Robin, He will always be that tough as nails, but with a heart-type guy street cop. We are compromised, Robin. I'm sending you to a safe house to protect a family that may be targeted by more than one threat. That threat including officers of the Texas Rangers. Read this file. This is what my contact in Austin found out. Robin read it thoroughly, stopping at the contents in shock. Guy's wife in a sex tape? A deputy sheriff's wife forced to have sex with the sheriff? A gym teacher shot before he could release evidence. Jesus, Captain, this reads like a novel. I'll stick to the newspaper and sports magazine, thanks. Jokes aside, you're heading to the location listed now. Should take a few hours to get there with traffic. No one knows you are coming, and they will not know until you are literally on the front door. You answer me, and only me. This thing is big, Robin. We have governors, senators, gangsters, and cartels to start with as far as power and influence is concerned. This hasn't made it to court yet, and we think this woman, Kate Kelly, is key to putting these 6 scumsuckers away. I need you for this. Right now you're all I got. I understand, I'll let you know when I'm there, Captain. Robin, be careful, all right? Becca gave her signature smile and nodded at the captain before driving off. When she arrived at the residence, she saw 2 patrol cars and a Texas Ranger in the front lawn. She decided to park a few houses down before she made her way home. Looking at the file, she gave a final look at the family inside the home, and the officers she's expected to see. Suddenly, she hears gunshots from the house. She gets out immediately, gun in hand. As she got closer, she saw a deputy lying on the ground with a head wound, a pool of blood around him. Then she heard voices. The Boy Scout is dead. Get the witch and her kids. I want to get paid. She then saw a woman struggling to get away from a burly man. She was followed by another man who had a child in his hand, who was also fighting him. The little one bit me. That jerk was all she needed. At 50 yards, her favorite sidearm, a chrome-coated 92 FS Beretta. The man suddenly drops with the child in hand. He turns to see who shot him. The woman yells to her son, "Go, baby, go. Get away from here." As the little boy ran away, the woman is immediately struck with a punch to the face, knocking her out and pulled into the van. The boy soon ran to the backyard of a neighbor, telling them what happened as they got him inside. Good, the kid's safe, Robin thought to herself. The man sees who shot him. Texas Rangers, don't move. Screw you. The man was dead the moment he raised his gun at her. The bullet entered between his eyes, leaving his body to slump dead on the ground. Robin then sees another little boy being forced into the van, who is followed by 3 more men. This is bad. I got no cover out here, and I can't go back to the car. I'm too far. Before she can do anything, she feels a hot pain in her left eye, followed by a second one in her lower right. Falling to the ground in pain, she feels the blood on her face and realizes she has been shot twice. Thinking fast and using all her might before she passes out, she gets on her knee, and she takes aim. The first shot hits the man with the AR-15, who decided to finish the job. His body fell away from the speeding van. Then the second shot hits someone aiming their gun through the back window. Blood escapes his shoulder as he loses the gun. The third shot hits the back driver's side tire. She knew it couldn't stop it, but maybe, somehow it would buy the woman and her child time. She was so tired, so weak. The adrenaline is now fading. As she falls over, she swears she hears someone demand an ambulance. And then darkness. When she awoke, she was in a hospital room. She tried opening her left eye but couldn't for some reason. As she rubbed the material, it all came back to her. The shootout, the mother and children. Where are they? They are safe. She heard a man's voice. She had never seen him before, and yet he seemed familiar. He had a tired smile, stood at 5 feet 9 inches, muscular and lean. He had dirty jeans that looked like they were dragged through dirt, with the black sleeveless shirt to match, and what looked like worn face paint. He looked like he had been through a war. I see someone is awake. Robin turned to her right to see her captain. You did good, hun. What is going on? You said they were safe, but how? I tried but could not save them both. They rode off before they could reach their meeting place. You killed the 2 corrupt rangers and wounded another individual in the back seat, then took out the tire. Driver had to stop and get it fixed before he could move on. And the wounded needed a place to get stitched up. I don't understand, Robin said, confused. You gave them time, valuable time? Robin noticed the man's smile, but also the tension of his fist. I'm sorry, who are you? Robin, this man is the one who broke the tape scandal. Tim Kelly. The gentleman next to him is his lawyer, Andy. Another man came through the door, and the man who just came in is U.S. Attorney General David Williams. Robin was silent. She did not say anything, but took it all in. Mr. Williams then spoke. Ms. Albin, due to your bravery, you have assisted in the saving of 4 lives. If not for you, things may have turned out different. She sensed the mood in the room. Lives were saved, but something happened. Ms. Albin, Robin, please, she interrupted. Yes, of course, Robin. You were out for the past week, and a lot has happened since. What this is not a confession, but an explanation why I nor any attorney is pressing charges to Mr. Kelly. Robin looked confused. Why would he be charged? Because of what I did to the men who took my wife and son. There was no emotion in his words, and they chilled her to her core. It's because of you I got to them in time, that I stopped them from. Tim paused before he continued. Just so you know, I'm telling you what I did, not anyone else. And everyone in this room is connected, including you. Just hope you got the stomach for it. Robin nodded. I understand why the captain is involved. He was helping a friend, which is why he sent me. The lawyer is here to make sure you don't go to jail and is your friend. But why is the attorney general agreeing to this? The man calmly took off his glasses and allowed a single tear to drop before answering. Because if not for you and Mr. Kelly, my daughter would be dead or sold half away around the world. Mr. Kelly, if you wouldn't mind. Again, you have my word, sir. With that, Tim thought back to the compound where he had tracked his family, and the day when all involved would change forever. Tim meets Jeannie's family. They are asked to be under protective custody by the cops, but Tim rejects it and comes up with his own plan. Tim is later identified as a person who was responsible to the disappearance local drug lords from his hometown. So, Jeannie and his family agree with Tim's plan. Finally, the bad guys attack Tim and Jeannie for one final time. Jeannie finally got her revenge by killing her husband. Tim gets his revenge on JW and told him, you will scream, you will beg, you will cry, you will piss and shit on yourself, and then you will beg still more. At some point, you will beg me to kill you. But I'll keep you alive and suffering as long as I can. It's time to take care of the rest one by one. The jangling phone awoke everyone at 6:30. Tim was closest, so he answered. Jeannie came in and sat on her dad's bed watching the expression on Tim's face change from sleepy but inquisitive to concerned to irate. He cussed a blue streak for a good 20 seconds, then sat on his bed and took 5 slow, deep breaths. Jeannie hurried over and sat by him, but he shook his head at her and returned to the call. Sorry for the outburst, Jim. What do you have? He listened for a couple of minutes without speaking, turned red from head to toe, and then stated vehemently, Don't feed me that crap. I trusted you. I trusted the Texas Rangers. You screwed up a simple job. What happens next is on you. The whole damn lot of you. I'll find out where they are, and then I'm coming, and hell is coming with me. Y'all had your chance and crap your pants. Now keep your butts in Austin and wait for the TV crews to tell you what happened. And do not tell your chain of command anything. They are in it, and so are some of our scumbag politicians. You know it, and we have it on tape. So do not say a word to anyone else, God damn it. He slammed the phone into the cradle and strode to the coffee pot. He poured a black cup and stared out the window in silence, then went back to the phone and called Nate. War council in an hour. Tell Jesse and Jose they need to be here with the 3 prisoners. I want only you 3, Daniel, Chewy, and Chivo. This is not a drill. He turned to Jeannie and Joe. Karen and one of my boys were kidnapped at shift change last night. Thankfully, one of my sons got away. It looks like an inside job, but the incompetent wrenches don't know crap. That means I'll be heading north sometime today, after the war council and interrogation. This could get really nasty, so maybe it would be better if you went back to San Antonio. They could come after Jeannie, Joe. So you should take what you need and hire whomever you need to fortress up. Jeannie had been frozen with an incredulous look on her face. She came out of it, grabbed him in a bear hug, and said, Oh my God, not your boy. How could that happen? They have crap for an explanation. A ranger was overseeing the operation, and 2 local deputies were guarding them. All they know is, shift change happened at 2 a.m., and when the sheriff's office started calling at 6 a.m., no one answered. They sent a car. Her parents were bound and gagged in the safe house. Karen, Patrick, and the deputies were gone. Mark thankfully got away and hid with a neighbor. The ranger isn't answering either. Want my take? The ranger, the deputies, and maybe more were in on it, and my family is being held somewhere as collateral against exposing the crooked scumsuckers in Austin who have been sanctioning this shit all along, as well as participating and getting paid. They think they are above the law, and they probably are, but they aren't above a bullet through the brain. With that tirade spilled, Tim called his friend Will in New Braunfels. He gave him a brief summary and told him he would need help. Will said he would let Los Ratones who lived around the area know, and they would be ready. Jeannie was wringing her hands. Joe was packing, and he ordered Jeannie to do the same. She hugged Tim again and ran to the bedroom. Tim phoned Deputy Jackson. It took a few minutes for him to get to a private phone and call back. Tim told his tale and asked for help. Jackson said he would take a couple of days of comp leave to begin after his shift ended this afternoon and would spend the day trying to get information. Nate was early, but there were 3 cars right behind him. Everyone he asked for was there, but so was Sheriff Rodriguez. Tim stared at Nate and then cut his eyes to the sheriff. "You probably don't want to be here, Sheriff." Miguel looked behind himself, frowned, and said, "I don't see no stinking sheriff." Gesturing broadly to the others, he asked, "Anyone see a stinking sheriff? I'm here with my friends for the fishing tournament." Tim waved him forward and they embraced. "Wrenches, can't do anything, right?" Tim said with conviction. They walked into the cabin, took the coffee cups Jeannie had prepared, and took seats around the table. "Where are Los Angeles?" Tim asked with a frown. "Secured off-site, just in case. Let's get this talked out just a bit, and then we can ask them for their assistance," Nate replied calmly. "Let me start," Miguel requested. "I've been on the phone all morning, and I've learned a few things that may help." He laid out what he had learned from various sources, including Jim Boyd. Turning to Tim when he mentioned the Ranger, he said, "A thoroughly chastened and embarrassed Jim Boyd. I might add, he's taking leave and coming down for the fishing tournament himself. Anyone with the balls can come fishing, but everyone needs to understand the rules, and if they can't play by those rules, they need to stay away." "Exactly what are the rules, Hermano?" Nate asked. "My family lives, everyone involved dies. No mercy." Looks were exchanged around the table, and everyone shrugged. "Sounds like a start to a good plan. I'd like to suggest an addendum. Your family lives, the scum die, and we all live happily ever after, back home. How does that sound?" Tim actually smiled. "Thanks. I forgot to add that. It's been a part of every other plan, and it need to be in this one too. Now, can we go ask the prisoners for their assistance?" Joe came over, shook Tim's hand briskly, hugged him tightly, and said he would make sure Jeannie is safe, but he would be available if needed. Jeannie was stoic, but her lip quivered while she held him. She kissed him as if it was their last kiss, and then turned and walked to her dad's truck with her suitcase and clothes bag. Off-site turned out to be at the pit where the others were buried. 3 triangular hoists had been erected, and each had a bandito hanging over a small fire. A pile of mesquite limbs lay close by. Chivo walked over to the 3, grinned at them, and flashed his Bowie knife at them. "Which one do I get?" "You can't cook all 3. I need some fun Tambian." 30 minutes later, they had everything they needed. The drug cartels keep information compartmentalized, but these pendejos are too stupid and arrogant, Miguel opined. Or they are so confident we won't come after them on Lake Travis they aren't worried. Of course, that would be fatal arrogance. But maybe they really are that stupid. They are counting on the big shots protecting them, as they have been, Nate interjected. These cabrons are that stupid, for sure. But are their protectors really this dumb? Or are we walking into a trap? "I don't give a crap either way," Tim stated coldly. "I'm coming after their butts, and anyone in the way is going to die." They buried the bloody remains in the same pit using the backhoe, replanted trees and brush over their grave, and laid sandstone rocks around carelessly. There was no sign of a dig, or of what was buried, yet Daniel said he would make it better when he had time. By tomorrow, it would look like the rest of the pasture. Back at the house, Miguel called Boyd on his private line. They talked for a few minutes, both informing the other of news and information gained, and then Miguel handed the phone to Tim. Boyd tried to apologize again, but Kelly cut him off and told him nothing would be forgiven until his family was safe. "If you really are planning to help, get with Randy Jackson. My friend Will is coming up with a few other friends from around New Braunfels, and you guys can come to the fishing tournament together. I'll give you his number in a second, but, Jim, let me warn you. If anyone gets in my way, or if anyone is a mole, I promise you they will regret it direly." He handed the phone back to Miguel, and the Leos talked some more. Tim and the others began final preparations. By 3:30, they had everything loaded and ready. They made a few changes to the working plan based on new information and headed north at 3:55 p.m. About 30 miles later, they passed a military convoy headed to maneuvers, and Nate wondered aloud which was better armed. They rendezvoused on a ranch near Henley, west of Dripping Springs. The landowner lived in Houston. The ranch hand who lived there was Daniel Mendez. Junior Boyd informed them that Gomez, the leader of the Devil's Angels, was handling security at the lake house near Spicewood. He and 10 men were there, Karen and her sons were there, and there were at least 5 other women there, 2 of whom came with the Assistant Attorney General and the Railroad Commissioner. He didn't know the identities of the other three, but missing persons reports had been issued 2 days ago for 2 high school seniors who were considered runaways. Randy Jackson was reconnoitering and would fill them in when they met up near the RR Commissioner's Lake house. Everyone donned camouflage and boots, and faces were painted with black smudge. Their firepower included 2 sniper rifles with noise suppressors made by a gunsmith in Marble Falls, ARs with suppressors, 2 automatic shotguns, the bazooka, and a grenade launcher. The last 3 would not be used unless the plan went bad, but they would be readily available if needed. They met Jackson on a ranch road in a valley about a mile from the sprawling lake house. He had been a member of a Marine sniper scout team, and Miguel was his Army counterpart, so this was their operation to lead. After Jackson briefed them, they made a few adjustments to the plan, and then parked the 2 vans in the brush away from the road. They crowded into 2 seats in the bed of the pickup and proceeded toward the house with the lights off. The night was dark, but the road was paved with limestone and there were white rocks along the edge, so it wasn't that hard to see. 2 groups of 3 were dropped off at locations selected by Jackson. They would circle to end up on the right and left sides of the lake house. The remaining 2 teams proceeded without headlights a quarter mile further up the hillside where they turned off the main road onto a pasture road and parked the truck. Miguel went right with a sniper rifle. Randy Jackson went left with the other. They would establish diagonal fields of fire to maximize the area covered by each marksman. The distance was not at all challenging, but they needed to take out as many as possible early on, so patience and timing were as critical as accuracy. Tim, Nate, and the elder and younger Mendez crept up the hillside to the crown, spread out, and used binoculars and spotting scopes to find the location of the people inside. The 8 guards outside were not hard to spot. They were well armed, carrying AK-47s, but they were sloppy and undisciplined, wandering along the perimeter of the limestone patio that surrounded the house and stopping to talk when they got close to one another. Jackson had one of the sniper rifles and Miguel had the other. They had a diagonal field of fire that overlapped in front. Their fire would be the signal that sent the others from the brush across the narrow open area near the stone patio and into the house. The assault would come from the west, which was the front, as well as from the right and the left. The snipers would remain in place for a few minutes to provide cover fire. The other 10 men would breach the house, which was situated on the edge of the cliffs above the lake. There was neither ingress nor egress to the east. 2 guards were grouped, talking, on the southwest corner and 2 more were on northwest corner when the snipers each fired twice. They heard a double poof from each side. The bullet being fired made one. The bullet striking the target made a second. The 4 guards simply collapsed on the limestone. The remaining guards were nonchalantly walking around when more poofs took them out. The 3 teams ran across the open ground from 3 sides. They checked the guards and proceeded across the patio to the walls of the house. They peered in the windows and signaled one another with fingers raised to signify the number found. There were 8 downstairs, grouped in the living room that spanned the back of the house. 3 were girls Tim had never seen before. They were totally naked, as were the 4 men. One of the girls was being assaulted, a knife to her throat. They were all standing near the bar. Tim entered through the front door. Jesse's team entered from the south, and Jim Boyd's team came around the north side to enter through the open patio doors on the east, or lakeside. Tim signaled for Jim's team to watch the stairwell. His team crossed from the entry hall to the bar in on a few steps, closing in behind the 4 men. Jesse's team was behind the 2 women. 6 suppressors were placed against the heads of the naked. The men could see Jesse's team. The girls could see Tim's. Time then used his blade and knurled decapitated the fat man who was assaulting the girl on the corner of the sofa. He quietly announced, "If you scream or make any noise at all, you die. Is that understood?" They nodded, and he continued, "I'm here to get my wife and 2 sons. Where are they?" No one answered. Tim reached behind his neck and pulled the short sword out of the scabbard between his shoulders. He placed the blade under the neck of the man who's standing stock still with Tim's rifle, held in his right hand, still against his head. "You have 10 seconds to speak up, or you will never speak again." 9, 8, 7. The man rasped, "Upstairs. They are upstairs." "Upstairs where, exactly?" Tim asked. The man to Tim's left turned his head just enough to see Tim and proclaimed, "Kelly, I should have known. You're in way over your head, boy. Let us go and we'll give you the kids. We keep your wife, but I doubt you give a shit." "Hello, ex-sheriff. Fancy seeing you here," Tim replied. "Why exactly am I in over my head? It would seem that we are in control here. Boy, you don't have any idea who you're messing with. If, and that's a big if, you survive the night, we will hunt you down like a dog and kill you. Then we will kill everyone you know and care about." We have more power in this state than LBJ did, and we are totally ruthless. Tim slit the throat on the man in front of him, and then swung his sword backhanded. It hit the disgraced sheriff in the mouth, breaking teeth and chopping through his jaw so badly it was left hanging. He fell to his knees, blood spurting from his mouth and terror in his eyes. Tim stood over him, thrust the sword into his neck and twisted, and the sheriff toppled over, dead. We ain't doing crap, Sheriff, 'cause you're on your way to hell. He turned his eyes back to the others and held his bloody sword pointed at one of the young women. Tell me what I want to know, or you join them. 9, 8. She fell to her knees and frantically answered, Please don't kill me. The boy is locked in the small bedroom upstairs. You have to go to the end of the hall and turn left. It's all the way down the hallway. The blonde woman and the 2 girls are with the other men in the bedroom across the hall. The big bedroom with a glass wall overlooking the lake. Tim turned his eyes and his sword to the other young woman. How many men? She immediately answered, I think there are 6, but there could be as many as 9. We were entertaining the commissioner and the sheriff on the couches, so I didn't see. I haven't been up there all night, but I saw the Gomez brothers and General Spieth go up with 4 men I didn't know. She pointed to the man to Tim's right. Commissioner Landon knows. Ask him. Commissioner? Tim asked pointedly, with his sword touching the bald man's nose. In a tone of voice bordering on defiance, the commissioner said, We need to negotiate something here. Tim drove the point into his nose and sliced the septum cartilage, leaving his nose hanging. No negotiation. Tell me or die. Commissioner Landon grabbed his nose and took a breath as if to scream. Daniel the Younger jabbed him in his pineal eye with his rifle, knocking him out. He collapsed on the floor, and Tim turned his attention to the remaining man, who had remained still and seemingly unaffected. Your turn, Tim said mildly. The unknown man looked straight ahead and replied in a calm voice. There are 2 guards with AKs and 8 others. Just so you know, one is the Assistant Attorney General of Texas, one is a Texas Ranger, one a deputy sheriff, and another is the leader of a Mexican cartel. So you may want to rethink your plan to retrieve your family if you want to live. Oh shit. Tim hissed with mock fear. You don't mean the Mexican cartel Los Angeles del Diablo, do you? The Devil's Angels? Yes. Manuel Gomez and his brother are both up there. The man shrugged his shoulders. I don't know who the women are, but they've stopped screaming, so they may or may not be alive. The Gomez boys are mean scumsuckers, but Spieth is something much worse. And who the hell are you? Tim asked him. Someone you don't want to mess with, he replied. Tim nodded and Daniel the Elder pulled the trigger. Okay, I won't, Tim said to the falling corpse. Now, girls, you see your fate, Tim said as he stared at the naked young women. Landon would be dead too. Except I think he knows more about the monsters behind this neurotic slavery trade than he's had the opportunity to disclose. You do too. So we're going to tuss you up and run upstairs to have a discussion with the men up there. You are going to lie still, be quiet, and wait for us to return. If we hear even a squeak from you, well, you know. Tim then noticed the girl who was with the fat man. She looked no older than 18. She didn't say or do anything but cry and bring her legs to her chest. He ignored that for now. He had to save his family. Miguel and Randy came through the front doors on high alert, carrying the 2 automatic shotguns. They nodded at each other. Jesse brought them up to date, and the entire crew followed them up the stairs. No guards were visible as they made the hallway, but you could hear voices in the bedroom on the right. Tim nodded at Chivo, who stepped to the fore carrying throwing knives in each hand. The others fanned out into doorways and bedrooms on each side. Vados. Que paso? Chivo called when he was within 10 feet of the 2 men peering into the open door. They stepped back, pulling the door partially closed, and asked, Quien Eries Carbon? As they raised their AKs. Chivo threw both knives underhanded. Each knife buried itself in the throat of a guard, and they dropped onto the carpet. The sound of their rifles falling was muffled by the thick carpet, but Tim and his crew hurried to the doorway just in case. Those sounds from within the room continued without interruption or change, so they dragged the guards away from the door and assumed positions around it. Tim held up his hand. He, Nate, and Daniel Jr. went left, down the hall and into his son's room, rifles ready. Patrick was alone, asleep on a king-size bed. He quietly expelled a sigh of relief, backed out the doorway, and asked Nate and Daniel to take care of his son. They replied that they would care for him as if he were their own. Tim heard the door lock behind him. Miguel and Randy were standing at the master bedroom door, shotguns at the ready, waiting with the team for his direction. He inched the door open and looked through the crack at the back. Katie was in the middle of a huge bed, and sobbing young women were on either side of her. The sobbing women were being double-teamed, and a knife was pressed against the face of each by the man they were screwing. Katie was lying over a big pillow, and a small, thin man was pummeling her from behind while pulling her head up with something. She was unnaturally silent and still. The Gomez brothers were leaning against the glass of a window facing the lake, watching and talking in Spanish. Two other men were standing by the south wall watching. One held a video camera, filming the vile acts on the bed. Everyone in the room was naked. Tim whispered the number of men and their locations, counted down from 3, threw the door open, and led them into the room. Leaving the brothers and the other men to the shotguns and rifles, he all but beheaded the closest knife wielder. The other knife wielder dropped his, tried to back up, and Tim hamstrung him. He screamed in pain and fell backward, bleeding profusely. The Gomez brothers raised their hands. One of the men watching from the wall ran toward a chair with a pistol lying on it, but Randy's shotgun cut him in half. Chewy took the video camera from the other and ordered him to face the wall with his hands on the wall above his head. Tim faced the man behind Katie and saw that she was being garroted by the man behind her, who was frozen in place. Tim raised his sword and advanced. The man dropped the garrote and scrambled backward, his pitiful excuse as he cowered against the headboard. The two men who had been assaulting the young women likewise scrambled backward, and the one closest to the door tried to grab a gun that was hanging on a belt on the bedpost. Ranger Boyd stepped toward him with his AR centered on him and said, "Yeah, you do that. I'll gut shoot you and watch you die slowly and painfully." He sat back on the bed and raised his hands. Boyd took the pistol, holding his rifle a foot from the man's round belly. Katie slumped forward on the pillow. Tim knew by her lack of movement that she was dead, but checked her pulse anyway. Pure rage filled Tim. He saw the skinny man and what he had done to Kate. But he knew that she may or may not be dead, but she was not pale, which meant he could save her. And he needed to quell that hate for just a moment to save the mother of his children. "No," Tim said to himself. He immediately started CPR. One man tried to rush Tim, but he was met with a shotgun slug to the gut. "Bleed out, you piece of shit." Tim performed the act with renewed vigor. "No, Kate, don't leave us. You have 2 little boys who need their mother. You fight, you hear me?" Tim breathes into her mouth again, the mark on her throat evident. Again, he pumps 30 times on her chest, then breathes twice. Again and again, until she suddenly showers up into his mouth, gasping for breath. Then suddenly flares and fights anyone who's close. She then sees the skinny man cowering in the corner and rushes to him, kicking and punching him, starching at his eyes. "You sick scumsucker. I'll kill you. What did you do to me?" Tim then grabs and holds her. "Kate, it's me. Listen to my voice. Look at me." When she turns to see him, she breaks down in tears. "Tim, oh, thank God you're here. Thank you. Our baby? Where? He is safe just like you. It's over, honey." She cries uncontrollably all over his shoulder. Her naked and abused body shown to all. "My dress, they tore it off. I need." Without a word, Tim ordered one of the naked men up. "Give me your clothes, while you still have a tool." Tim's voice was cold and cruel, and the man went to the piles of clothes and placed a pair of jeans and a button-up at his feet. Seeing the pants were too big, Tim saw a belt by the bed. When he went to retrieve it, Kate screamed, "No, not that belt. That scumsucker used it on me. Kate stopped speaking and cried again, reliving the horrifying ordeal again. But she doesn't care. Time then looks at the man who was choking her. "It's all right, it's over. Come on, let's get you to Patrick." With that, Kate got dressed and was taken to her son. When Tim and Kate saw Patrick, they shared a tearful reunion. "Mommy, Daddy, you were okay." All hugged as tight as they could. Patrick cooed, hid his tears. Kate and Tim didn't bother to hide tear. "Mommy, I thought the bad men were going to hurt you. I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Kate cried even more when she heard that. Love and pride boomed in her heart from her son's words. "Baby, all that matters is that you are safe. I'd never let those bad men hurt you." Then Patrick hugged his father. Hugged him so tight he didn't want to let go because he thought he might be taken from him too. "Daddy, you saved us. Thank you, Daddy. Thank you. I love you and Mommy so much." Tim's tough facade faded as he shed tears with his family. "I love you too, little man." Tim then spoke. "I have to go back upstairs." Kate nodded and understood. "Come on, baby. Daddy has to take care of the bad men now. We need to go." Tim thanked Nate for taking care of Kate and his son. "Get the girls and my son outside." When he arrived back in the room, all the men were huddled in a circle, but the girls were on the other side of the room. He could see the tears still fresh on their faces and could only imagine what they went through prior him arriving. "You two, go to that man in the corner and stay right there and don't move. Do you understand?" Both girls nodded vigorously, grabbed bed covers, and scurried to the corner behind Randy Jackson. The cold fury Tim had maintained all night began to boil, and the thin man saw death in his eyes. He blanched, recovered a bit, and then blustered. "Do you know who I am? I'm the Assistant Attorney General of the state of Texas. Whoever you are in a bunch of trouble." 11 of the 12 men in Tim's crew laughed uproariously. Tim smiled evilly and asked, "Do you know who I am?" "No? Let me introduce myself. I'm Karma Incarnate. I'm God's avenging archangel. I'm her husband. I'm your worst nightmare." The look on AAG Spieth's face quickly morphed to horror, and he tried to shrink into the sheets. Tim reached in front of the man cowering to Spieth's right, nicked the AAG's left shoulder with the sword just enough to get some blood flowing, and snarled at him. He balled up and sobbed. On the other side, Boyd grabbed his man by his hair and pulled him off the bed. As soon as his knees hit the floor, Boyd kicked him as hard as he could in the stomach. The man folded forward, and Boyd flung his head down. His head struck the floor, but his butt was still in the air. Boyd stepped behind him and lifted him off the ground with a kick to the nuts. He squealed and then puked. Boyd placed his boot on his head, holding his face in his puke. He turned to the crew. "Let me introduce you to the Texas Ranger charged with keeping Tim's wife and their son safe. This is the sellout turncoat, Terry Jones. The SOB over there on the bed is the deputy sheriff who was supposed to be with them, keeping them safe. His name is Don Long." Gesturing to the two men with his rifle, he asked, "Which of you two would like to tell us where the other deputy is?" Neither spoke up. Tim nodded at Chivo, who walked over to the ranger, flicked his wrist, and cut off his ear. The scream died in Jones' throat when Boyd's boot crushed his cheek. Chivo started around the bed to Deputy Long, who put up his hand in the stop gesture and blurted out he wouldn't go along with the plan, so Long shot him. "We tossed his body in a creek somewhere near Taylor. I didn't want to do it. He was my friend. Long killed him, not me." Tim interjected, "But you let kill Jones your partner, didn't you? You are Long's partner in the kidnapping, right? You are the one assaulting this young woman, aren't you? Gentlemen, please cast your ballot." 12 votes of guilty were loudly cast. Tim nodded at Will and Guillermo, another Raton from New Braunfels, ordered them to find out what else he knows, and then carry out his sentence. Chivo grinned like the madman he became when a battle began. The doomed deputy was drugged from the room and down the stairs. His muted screams were heard for less than 10 minutes before they ceased. Randy was guarding the cameraman. Tim, Daniel, Chewy, and Jesse were in a semicircle around the Gomez brothers. Given their status as ruthless cartel leaders, the Gomez looked scared shitless, and one was, literally. There was a mess on the back of Andres' leg, the glass, and the floor. The naked men shrunk against the glass and Manuel tried to negotiate, offering millions of dollars if they were set free, unharmed. Chewy reached out, flicked his knife, and cut on his chest. When his screams died down, Chewy said, "You won't be unharmed, but you might live. It depends on how pissed El Rey de los Ratones is. Teo, how pissed are you? Take them downstairs to Chivo. He'll soon be through with the other one. Tell him to make them remember every girl they ever drugged, assaulted, and sold into slavery. That would include, of course, his niece, so let him carve her name into them if he wants." Tim said dispassionately. With a small grin he added, "Before you get downstairs, tell them what happened to the men they sent. And now that we know who they are, what will happen to their families and friends? They need to know before their torture begins that their petty empire is gone and their parents, wives, and heirs will be dead within a week." He turned to the Gomez, "CTN Ultimas Palabras. Ora es el momento, cabrons." Both cabrons had last requests. They began begging loudly, beseeching Tim to spare their families, who they proclaimed were innocent of any wrongdoing. The sadistic smile lit his face again. "My sons were innocent. Did that stop you from kidnapping them or planning to kill them? Did their innocence keep these and many other girls from being kidnapped and assaulted, sold into slavery? Did being a good person keep my wife from being garroted by this piece of scum that you brought here? No, Pendejos, you die, your progeny die, and then everyone kin to you by blood or marriage dies. Many people will die, though not as many as you drugged, assaulted, sold into slavery, or killed. That, Pendejos, is your legacy. To die without anyone surviving to remember or honor your passing. You simply disappear, unloved and forgotten, and so does your genetic line. He gestured toward the door. Take them away, and make them pay in pain and blood for their transgressions. The weeping and wailing as they were pushed out of the bedroom and down the hall was poorly aligned with their reputations as badass criminals, gang leaders, and cartel builders. Tim laughed. The devil's angels, huh? Bunch of kiddies dressed up as bullies, picking on girls. By the time they die, they will regret every decision that led them here. Miguel, you and Jose drag this hamstrung whimpering witch downstairs and interrogate him properly. We don't know who he is, what his position is, and what he knows about this enterprise, so don't let him die before you find out. Randy, Jim, and I will interrogate these three. Tim turned his attention to the man facing the wall, still holding his hands above his head. Randy, watch the little punk on the bed. If he tries to escape, blow a leg off, but don't kill him. I'll be the one that finishes him off, and that won't happen until his penance is done. Tim slipped his blade between the butt cheeks of the man facing the wall and pressed the tip against his butt. While I count down from 10, you will be telling us who you are, your role in this ongoing tragedy, and what you know about it. You need to offer information so valuable that I won't shove this sword up your, but when I reach 0, let's get started. 9 to 8. The man emptied his bladder on the wall and began babbling. I'm Adam Ballard, the Chief of Staff for General Spieth, and I can give you the names of elected officials, legislators, and law enforcement officials who have participated in and covered up these activities. I can show you where we stashed the films and tapes he has made over the past 5 years. I'm a treasure trove of the information you want, I swear. Just please don't kill me. Tim looked at Ranger Boyd and Deputy Sheriff Jackson, both of whom were awestruck. It sounds like we hit the jackpot, boys. Randy, would you take Mr. Ballard downstairs to the kitchen table, get him a drink of water, and then record his statement? If you think he's holding out, take a finger, then take a toe, another finger, another toe, and so forth. When you run out of digits, switch to his ears and eyes, hands, feet until he is honest, forthright, and forthcoming. Girls, go with Deputy Jackson. He will help you find clothes, and make sure you are comfortable. Randy, put them in a room away from the carnage, but make sure they don't leave until we've had a chance to talk. Spieth and Landon's slaves can have water and go to the bathroom, but keep them naked and scared. I haven't decided what to do with them. Girls, you've seen how ruthless we are. Don't make the mistake of thinking our sympathy for your mistreatment will keep us from killing you if you try to leave without permission. When we're through, we'll have a conversation around your future. Do you have any questions? Jackson stood beside the girls. Adams was in front of him, with the rifle against his spine. The girls stood up. They were still clinging to one another, but no longer sobbing. The leggy, long-haired brunette gathered herself and spoke up. We want to thank you, Coach Kelly. Yes, we recognized you even with all the stuff on your face. I'm Sharon, from your advanced physics class. This is Jana and Rebecca. They didn't have you as a teacher. We want you to know what happened and how we got here. We left Dairy Queen. Melissa and I were taking Jana home to Jonestown when someone forced our car off the road. We were in the lonely stretch near the park and no one was around. We saw it was Coach Rogers and Coach Slaughter, and we started screaming. They bound and gagged us and threw us in the trunk of the car they were in. We drove for a while and then turned onto a bumpy dirt road. We stopped at an old house. They left us tied up, but removed the gags, warned us no one could hear our screams, and told us how badly we were treated would be decided by how well we followed orders. You know us, Coach. We are good girls. We were 18-year-old and both of us had been assaulted by those vile men on dirty beds in that nasty house. And then other men came and assaulted us. They brought us here in a pontoon boat. And as soon as they took us upstairs but left Melissa downstairs and the assault began again. Mrs. Kelly was already here. They had her on the bed, but she fought them with every bit of strength she had. It inspired us, and we started fighting them too. The Mexican men brought your son in from another room and told her if she didn't do what the skinny guy wanted, he would kill your son. She quit fighting and cried. She called her son by name, told him she loved him to the moon and back, and to be a good boy for daddy. And take care of your brother when he came to get them. He were sobbing and fighting the men who carried them out of the room, screaming, "Don't hurt my mommy." The men all laughed about daddy coming, and the skinny man assaulted her. We're so sorry. Maybe if we had fought harder. No, don't blame yourselves. You did nothing wrong. These are evil men who prey on women and girls, and tonight they will pay for their sins. Go with Randy now. I want to be alone with the skinny man. I will talk to you later. Randy, Use the dual VCR downstairs to make at least 2 copies of the tape, and look for anything else that we don't want destroyed or falling into the wrong hands. Tim, Randy, and Jim knew they girls would never be the same, and they had sympathy for what had befallen them, but keeping the girls alive was a gamble. Nonetheless, they were innocents and had to be protected. The question was how to protect them without going to prison. "Where do you want to interrogate your turncoat witch?" Tim asked Ranger Boyd. "I'd prefer to do it somewhere I can use tools. I'm not much with knives and swords, but I'm good with tools like hammers, pliers, and cutters. I saw some when I checked the garage, so I'll get some help and take him out there. You understand that, after what we just saw and heard, I plan to take my time with his interrogation." "What about Assistant Attorney General Gordon Spieth?" Jim asked with a mocking sneer. "This skinny little no-tool punk is going to enjoy all the comforts of the bed he killed my wife in. Send Will, Guillermo, and someone else if you can spare them. Not Chivo, though. He's got too many to deal with already." AAG Spieth continued to blubber and cower on the bed, only a few feet from Karen's body. Tim approached him with the sword extended, laid it on the exposed portion of his back, and drug it across. Blood flowed from the long but shallow wound, and Spieth yelped as the pain and fear hit him. He peed on the pillow he is holding in front of his pitiful little prick. Tim taunted him and laughed at his terror. Will, Guillermo, and Jesse soon entered. "Soften him up a bit, but don't kill him." He made a trip downstairs to see Karen. Without word, he hugged her and his son again. He spoke to her. "I forgive you, Karen Mori. The Gillers upstairs told me what you did for our boy. You risked so much bringing him in this world, and you risk it again. Thank you. Thank you for being strong for him when I couldn't be. Thank you." Karen cried hearing those words. Forgiven. She held on to Tim with all her might. The girls were behind Tim to be reunited with Karen. They all embraced their former teacher in a tearful reunion. "I'll always love you, Karen Marie. I'm so sorry you suffered. But know that Rogers, Barnes, Benton, Slaughter, Hughes are all dead, and they all experienced great suffering before they died. Know also that Spieth, the ranger and the deputy that betrayed you, and the Gomez brothers are also dead, dying, or will be soon. Spieth will be the last to die, and he will welcome his own death. You will never see any of them again. I only hope someday I will be worthy of the Lord's forgiveness for what I've done and what I'm about to do. Maybe you can intervene on my behalf by saying a prayer or two. I love you now. I've loved you since the moment we met. Now you and our son and these girls need to go. The things I'm about to do will make me question if I will ever make it to heaven." Tim swept her hair back so that it surrounded her face, beautiful even after the horror she endured. She looked amazingly serene. Considering the circumstances of her trauma, Tim kissed her forehead and made his way back upstairs as Nate took the party outside, walking back to the master bedroom to face her assaulters and murdered. The sorrow turned again to fury and a burning need for vengeance. Spieth and the others would pay, and pay terribly for their sins. Spieth was on his stomach. Will was straddling his shoulders with his, but holding Spieth's head in the piss-saturated pillow, while he pummeled his ribs and kidneys. Wayne and Jesse were holding his left foot, which had a nail driven into the heel. Another was in the right heel. Spieth was screaming in pain and begging them to stop, but his head being pressed into the pillow muffled the sound. Wayne climbed off when he saw Tim. "His hands are tied to the bed frame, as you directed. What now?" "Raise his hips and put the big pillow under him," Tim directed, "and tie his feet to the corners." Tim took the rubber off the plunger he brought from the bathroom and forced it up Spieth's, but inch by inch. He screamed even louder and tried to wiggle away from the rough wooden cylinder without success. Tim forcefully pulled it out, leaving splinters in his sphincter. He screamed louder. "How many women and girls have you done this to, Splinter Tool?" "Well, what happens next is something you could never do with your tiny worn-down pencil tool, but I want you to be impaled for the rest of your short life, just as Karen was when you almost assaulted her." With that, he began shoving the plunger handle up him. Spieth screamed and passed out. Wayne poured cold water on him, and he awoke screaming. Tim placed a clear plastic trash sack over his head, and Will taped it closed around his neck. They watched as Spieth struggled and grew more oxygen-deprived, but Tim cut a hole in the bag just before he died. He fought for breath, gasping and choking. When he recovered enough to scream again, Will put tape over the hole, and they watched him approach death again in panic. Will pulled the tape off, and he gasped for air like a fish out of water. "Stop. For the love of God, please stop. Mercy, I beg you." A look of disgust was painted on Tim's face. "Mercy? You seriously asking me for that now? You assaulted my wife while choking her to death. She's alive, mind you. But what about the other girls you did this to? I still see her limp body as your sadistic smile was painted on her face. Did you show her mercy and the air left her lungs? What about the girls who didn't wake up? Did you show them mercy as they begged you to stop? Did you show them mercy when they knew the last thing they would see is a dirty room and you chalking them? Where was the mercy for them? Huh? Tell me, you sick scumsucker. Tell me. Tim continued using the plunger. The man's screams echoing in the house. Tim leaned down by his sweaty face. Would you like to live, or at least die quickly? We can keep this going all night, you know? Are you ready to answer our questions? He nodded frantically and sputtered yes. Your chief of staff says he knows where the video and audio tapes and the films are, so we don't really need you. But maybe you can earn some goodwill by telling us what else you have that incriminates others. Got anything like that? Yes, Spieth exclaimed. I have a whole box of photos of rich and powerful men and women having sex with underage girls and boys. Politicians too. Local, state, and even national. I can get them for you. Just let me live. As a gesture of good faith, give us the exact location and tell us how you will go about getting them out of hiding and to us, Tim parried. No, if I tell I know you will kill me. But I'll take you there, he bargained. Within 30 minutes you will have drawn us maps and given us keys, Tim answered quietly. Because for all your posing, you are a cowardly punk. The pain I'm about to subject you to will make what we've done seem like child's play. Do you really want that? Just give us what we need, and the pain will end. It didn't take 30 minutes. The scream of the drill was more than enough after what he had already endured. They had the location of everything, and the means to access it, before his balls were crushed by a baseball bat, and he was garroted in the same way he assaulted Karen but killed others. He died a pitiful and broken man. But Tim remained angry and unsatisfied. There were more evil men who needed to be punished, and his bloodlust was almost overwhelming. Downstairs, Tim was surprised to find one of the women dead and the other barely clinging to life as Chivo worked on her. It turns out they are neck deep in it, Tim, explained Miguel. They were recruiters for Spieth and Landon, who used the girls they befriended, drugged, and kidnapped before they were sold to Manuel Gomez and shipped all over the world. Both sang like canaries when Chivo turned to them after they had watched him at work. Well, actually, they all became songbirds. We have more information and evidence than we will ever be able to use, at least in a court of law. We have names of some of the young people who were kidnapped and used, but only a small portion. To be honest, we can probably close the book on most of the missing persons cases involving pretty young people in Texas over the past 4 or 5 years. We have the location of the films, videos, and audio tapes, and the combination to the vault. Adam's list of the people involved will change the face of Texas politics for years to come, but we will have to finesse usual processes because so many men and women in high places are involved to some degree. I assume Spieth gave you more. Want to share with us? Not right now. Jesse has the tape. You can review it at your leisure, but suffice it to say this goes back more than 3 or 4 years, and a lot of familiar names are involved. He had a box of photos, and he was untouchable because he did. Unless you need something else, we should get started on final arrangements. Where are the girls? Tim was directed to the guest bedroom behind the stairs. He sat with the 2 young girls and talked for 15 minutes while the others carried out the plan. When he came out, he told Daniel Sr. to go get Daniel Jr., Nate, and Tim's son. He had Randy take the girls outside and down the road a ways. Tim watched as his family and girls drove off the compound. He could not help but think how close he was to losing them. If he was even the slightest late, Karen would be dead, and his sons would be without a mother. And the teenage girls may have followed suit. He pictures Karen's lifeless body being used for a sick man's pleasure, and he shivers at the thought. Almost lost her. He says to himself. Something slowed them down, something allowed him to make it on time. He is not sure of who or what. He is just thankful it did. As the flames begin to expand on the compound, he makes his leave, following his family, away from the horrors of this cursed place. He smiles knowing that it will eventually burn to the ground. His son remains soundly sleeping as Karen and the girls, escorted by Nate and Tim, carried him over 2 hills and into the deep ravine behind the second hill. The girls made a small camp with blankets against the limestone cliff on the east side, and sat down still holding the sleeping innocent child entrusted to their care. Nate quietly reminded them of what was to come, and how to approach the cops and firemen who would respond first. Tim kissed his son on his cheek, and each girl on hers. He quietly asked the girls to review the plan, and they did so to his satisfaction. Nate told them they were extremely courageous girls, and he wanted to meet them in better circumstances. The other men were waiting on the road in their vehicles. Nate and Tim loaded up and they drove away. 30 minutes had elapsed when they came to the closed convenience store in the tiny town of Bee Cave. Tim got out and used the payphone to make a call. Their vehicles had circled and were facing north when they saw the fireball and then a glow on the northeastern skyline. They heard police sirens and watched the rural fire department volunteers pull in and park, scramble into their gear at the station just down US 71, and head north. The men each said a prayer, and the cavalcade proceeded back to the ranch near Dripping Springs. Nate and Tim were sitting at Tim's house in Cedar Park, watching the early morning news shows on Austin TV. There was live footage of a burning pile of rubble as the reporter described an explosion and house fire on Lake Travis near Spicewood. A fire investigator was interviewed, but all he could say is that they wouldn't know anything until the fire cooled and they could examine the evidence. However, it appeared there had been an explosion, perhaps gas, with the resultant fire. Nothing was said about survivors, which concerned the brothers. The girls and his sons should have been mentioned. At 7 o'clock, Tim called the sheriff's office in Karen's hometown. They said they had no new information at this time and thanked him for giving them his phone numbers. He called the local police and heard the same thing. Tim wanted to call Jeannie, Nate wanted to call Linda, but the plan forbade any calls that could be monitored, so they waited. The anxious waiting finally ended just after 9:30. A detective with the APD said the boys were at Brackenridge Medical Center in Austin and assured him they fine, physically, but emotionally distraught, so they were with a social worker and child psychologist. The detective requested that he come to the medical center immediately. Tim said he would, but asked, "Where is their mother?" The detective said, "She is under armed guard on the 3rd floor. They are checking for any STDs as well as treating her injuries." Nate drove like a bat out of hell on US 183, scaring even the hardened maniacs who drive the infamous Suicide Alley. There were no crashes, but the big 4-wheel drive pickup did go around slower cars on the shoulder or bar ditch, and red lights were treated as yield signs. They covered the 20 miles in 20 minutes. Nate dropped Tim at the emergency entrance and went to find a place to park. Tim hustled inside to the desk. He identified himself and a call was made. A plainclothes police officer appeared, introduced himself as Detective Cox, and asked Tim to follow him. Nate appeared as they were leaving the ER. Tim introduced him to the detective as his brother, and they were quickly escorted to the children's floor. The detective knocked on the door of a conference room where his boys were being held. A red-haired woman in a suit opened the door and motioned them inside. Patrick and Mark were facing away from them, being read to by an older woman in scrubs. Patrick turned around when he heard the door open. He jumped up, screamed, "Daddy!" and turned his chair over, rushing to him. Mark looked puzzled when he first turned, but then his face lit up and he rushed over crying, "Daddy! Daddy! Daddy!" Tim held both his sons in his arms and shed tears of joy as they kissed his cheeks and hugged him over and over. Nate stood back by the detective and woman. Tim saw a huge smile on each face as he spun his boys and kissed them back. The reunion went on for several minutes before little Mark took Tim's face in both hands and turned it toward him. He solemnly declared, "Daddy, bad men came and took us from Granny and Gramps. We drove a long way, and then they took us from Mommy." Patrick joined the story, adding, "Daddy, they took in a big room and Mommy was crying. The bad men were hurting her and she was crying. They said they were going to hurt us too, but Mommy begged them to leave me alone. They took me outside, but Mommy told us she loved me and to be good for you when you came to get us. I hate those mean men." Mark turned Daddy's head back to him and said, "Mommy said she loved us to the moon, but she was crying. Daddy, you need to find those bad men and get our Mommy back." Tears flowed from the eyes of every adult in the room, but Tim fought his back in order to remain calm for his boys. He said, "There are a lot of men looking for Mommy right now, boys. We need to get you home and wait for them to find them. We will call Granny and Gramps and we can go see them, but not before we see Mommy." Turning to the detective, Tim asked, "Can the boys see her yet?" The detective shook his head and replied, "I'll tell you what I know in a few minutes. Take care of your sons right now." Tim asked in a puzzled manner, "How did you find my son and wife?" "Your son and wife were with 2 young ladies. They were hiding in a ditch near the scene of a fire in a house on Lake Travis. I will tell what we know when we talk later. We're going to leave you in here with your sons. Right now, there is a phone you can use to call their grandparents or anyone else you want. Is it all right if I talk to your brother while you are with your boys?" "Sure. If you hear anything about Karen, please come tell me immediately. Before you go, who are the girls they were with?" The detective gave him their names and asked if he knew either one. He said he knew both, but not the third. They were students at the high school where he taught. He had one in his second period physics class, and he knew they participated in both dance team and track. They had never been babysitters for his sons, as far as he knew, so that didn't help him understand why they, rather than his wife, were with the boys in the middle of nowhere. Cox again assured him he would tell him what he knew later. After holding and talking to his sons a bit longer, Tim turned to the woman in scrubs and asked if she would stay and read to the boys, while me called their grandparents to tell them the boys were okay. She quickly agreed, and the boys reluctantly sat back on their little chairs while she read to them. Tim gave the report to his parents first and asked them to tell Linda, Daniel, and Dora. He then called Karen's parents and told them the good news of the boys being okay and with him, and the bad news that their daughter was assaulted. They wanted to come to the hospital, but he asked them to stay there in case Karen was allowed to call and tried to reach them. His next call was to Andy. He told him what he had learned about his sons and wife and asked him to relay the information to the housemans. Andy, I know the girls my boys were with, but I have no idea what they were doing with them. I'm also concerned that they get legal representation. They are going to have to explain a lot of things that may look suspicious to law enforcement, including how they took the boys and disappeared just before an explosion. Don't worry, they both have representation. Jana's dad is a friend. I called to offer my support when they disappeared, and he called me as soon as they were found. We are meeting with law enforcement this afternoon at 3:30 in my office. I'm also representing Sharon. The little boys were exhausted, and they fell asleep on his lap almost as soon as he sat down and held them. The woman in scrubs quietly introduced herself as a doctor specializing in children who had been traumatized. She said she had been assigned to his sons and offered to stay with the boys if he wanted to talk to the police officer now. Tim was directed to a conference room on the ground floor where he found Detective Cox, his brother, and 2 Texas Rangers talking quietly. They stopped when he entered, and the detective invited him to take a seat at the table. Jim Boyd was one of the Rangers. He introduced the other as his boss, Chief Ali. The somber tone of Chief Ali's voice reflected the somber look on the face of the officers and Tim's brother. Mr. Kelly, we have some bad news. The men who gave us the tapes found very damaging things. There was more images of your wife. Apparently there is no telling how many tapes. We have the image where they threatened your son in front of her. Your wife will endure severe trauma as a result of this, but your son may be scared for life if he does not receive the proper help. Tim had walked into the room supercharged with emotions he had dammed up, all the way back to the ambush at the ranch, through the events at the lake, and the reunion with his sons. The horror that Kate and the girls endured, the sick and perverse things he saw, broke the dam, and he wept deeply, openly, and unashamedly for several minutes. No one spoke or tried in any way to comfort him, but his anguish affected them all. Boyd left, leaving Nate and Tim alone in the conference room. Nate put his hand on Tim's arm. I know you meant those tears. The last few months aside, she is one hell of a woman, a great wife, a fantastic mother. We all screw up sooner or later. Unfortunately, hers was the mother of all screw-ups, and now you have 2 exceptional children to raise whose mom is broken and who need their daddy more than ever. As Tim was breathing, a man appears by him. Mr. Kelly? My name is Captain Xavier Davis. Let me just say I'm sorry for everything that has bestowed on your family. But let me also say, there is a reason why you arrived on time to save them, and if it's all right with you, would like to take you to that reason now. Tim was confused. Who was this man? He had never heard of him. But he heard there was a reason his son Mark wasn't kidnapped as well. He knew he had to know why. Mr. Kelly, one of my officers, arrived on scene when the kidnapping taken place. We knew we were compromised, so I sent one of my best to assist without informing. Thankfully, it was the wise move. She engaged them while they were taking your wife and child, but stopped one of them, Mark, from being taken. She then killed 3 of the perps, who turned out to be Ranger themselves, and shot their vehicle tires to slow them down before they could meet at their drop-off. They had to go underground for repairs and medical aid. Sir, she is the reason you had the time you needed to save you family. Would you like to meet her? Tim was dumbstruck. He spent the morning condemning the Texas Rangers, now to find out one of them was responsible for saving his son and possibly his family. Yeah, I'd like that. I'd also like to know when I could see my wife. Good, because there are some other folks that want to meet you. That girl, Rebecca? She is the daughter of the U.S. Attorney General. Tim was again in shock. Small world we live in. Back in the room, Robin listens in shock, all of it. The kidnappings, the assaults, the killing, all of it. She takes a breath before she speaks. You said I was connected, how? Tim looked at the U.S. Attorney General. I got a file on you to officer, friends in high and low places and whatnot. The murder of you parents? Robin nodded. A tear ran down her cheek. One of the men killed in that attack was the triggerman who gunned them down. Your mother and father were critical and taken down a sex trafficking ring years ago. Locked up a lot of bad people and cost them money and empires. The man who assaulted my wife, Robin, was taken aback, but nodded in adequation. Your parent were in an operation that was leading to him and his clients at the time. Unfortunately, he had the financial backing of some very bad people and put the bounty out on your parents. We also discovered the men you killed were agents who worked with your parents. We took their information and found out they were dirty, so we dug deeper. 30 years in law enforcement, we saw their bank statement had the occasional hike throughout their carry. That hike started when your parent died. We believe they were the ones that tipped the outfit off who they were, and the move was made on them. Rebecca took this all in. All emotions, shock, sadness, anger, acceptance, came in waves. I need a minute, please. Everyone left her to her own devices as she took this in. Tim decided to walk to Kate's room. He had not seen her since the incident. The doctors kept her this long so that they could do a psychological evaluation, as well as any medical issues such as assault kits, etc. When he arrived, he saw his in-laws outside. The look of gratitude shine in their eyes. Her father took him in tears. Thank you for bringing her back to us. I know she hurt you, but you brought her back anyway. Thank you, Tim. Oh God, thank you. Tim could only smile before he spoke. She was the mother of my children. Of course I would. Tim looked at the hallway and saw both his boys running to him. Daddy! Both almost tackled him. Daddy, you came for us. Tim fought a tear back, but let it fall with others following. Of course I did, and I'd do it again if I had to. He looked at his son who was kidnapped. I know you were scared, Bubby, but you were also very brave, and I'm proud of you. His son cried. Dad, I was there when the bad men took Mom away. Mommy was fighting them. I heard her from the other room. Then they took me to her and put a knife to my throat. They told her that if she didn't do what they wanted, they would kill me. She said she would do it, and told me she loved me to the moon and beyond. The bad men laughed, and they threw me into the other room. Dad, I heard Mom screaming. They were hurting her. Why did they do that? Tim held his crying son in his arms, as well as his brother. I don't know, but what matters now is that you and your mommy are safe. Tim looked down and tapped his boy's shoulder. Hey, want to see Mommy? Yeah. Tim couldn't hid his smile as he let the boys into her room. Kate was looking out the window, thinking back these past months. Everything that happened since that storm, not before that. How she disrespected her husband and betrayed her marriage for fun and stupidity. How she allowed herself to fall so low that not only did she endanger herself, but her entire family. I'll never forgive myself for this. Suddenly she heard the door open. The joyous screams of her sons. Mommy! Mommy! You're okay. Kate's tears fell like water from a faucet when she saw them. She held them as tight as she could when they came to her. Oh, my babies. Thank God you're safe. I love you much. I'm so sorry this happened to you. The tearful reunion continues for what seemed like forever. Both parties are afraid to let go of the other for fear of losing them again. I'm glad you're okay. Kate looked up to her husband at the door, a look of guilt and thanks on her face. You had us worried there. She then looked at her children. Hey guys, Mom and Dad need to talk about adult stuff, okay? No, Mommy, I don't want the bad men to come back and take you away. Yeah, Mommy will keep you safe. Both parents had a smile of love and pride when they heard their sons swear to protect their mother. I won't let anything happen to her boys. I promise to keep her safe. Boy hugged their mom one more time, then made their way out, hugging their father equally tight. Thanks for bringing Mommy back, Dad. We love you. Time teared up as he hugged his boy. I love you both too. Now off you go. As the door closed, Tim looked at his wife. A look of uncertainty. Without words, she ran to him and hugged her with all her might, and he did the same. Almost lost you, gal. Tears rained down both their faces. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for bringing me back to my boys. I'll always love you for that and more. When those words escaped her mouth, she took a moment and thought, then slowly let go of her husband and looked into his eyes. Tim, I'm signing my rights away. I'm not worthy or safe to be our children's mother. Before Tim could respond, she raised her hand. I'm not abandoning Tim, but after everything that has happened, I'm not stable nor safe enough to be around our children. Never mind everything I put you through. That night you discovered me with those scumsuckers in the cabin. That wasn't even the first time. I betrayed the man I love, our marriage and our family constantly for cheap thrills that honestly weren't even that good. I took advantage of the love you had for me and took everything else for granted. The people who laughed at you for me letting them screw me like a cheap 304, I was dumb enough to make me think it was powerful, when all it did was led to decadency. Then, when they tried to kill you, the man who I love, my husband, the father of my children, I ran and hid, thinking this would blow over, that if I threatened them with all I know they would leave us alone. I know you killed them. I'm just sorry I wasn't there to burn the bodies with you. Then, they took in our son. Oh God, Tim. I brought our family into my screwed up world. Kate broke down in tears as she collapsed. Tim helped her up, bring her to sit on her bed. Tim, when I came to, I woke up in that damn living room. They were like wolves hungry for a meal. Then I saw the girls. Tim, I taught them in my class last year at the high school. They told us what they were going to do to us. All in front of our son, Tim. More tears followed as Kate continued. They put me and the girls in a room and took our son to a different one. I can still hear him. Don't hurt my mommy. And they laughed. When one of the girls tried to leave, she was struck and bombed, as were the others. They brought me and two upstairs, leaving one downstairs. I fought the scumsuckers, Tim. Fought as hard as I could, Tim. With everything I had. I even kicked the skinny scumsucker in the jaw. The girls followed suit. We may have gotten away. But then they brought in our boy. Tim, they put a knife to my baby's throat. He was so scared. They told me if I kept fighting, they would make him watch what they did to me and kill me in front of him. Kate broke down in tears as she recalled the memory. Tim held her, feeling the anger return. He only wished the men he killed were alive, so he could take even longer killing them in the most brutal ways. I told them I would stop fighting them. Just don't hurt my baby. The look in the girl's eyes when I said that. Tim, all hope was gone in that moment. I told our son to be brave, that everything was going to be all right. I love you to the moon and beyond, and to listen to your father. Tim, I thought I would never see our boy again. I still hear him scream for me as they took him out of the room. The men took the girls to the bed and stripped them there. These girls, I taught them in class just last year. I was there at their prom and graduation. They were best friends since kindergarten, for God's sake. Now they were forced for those scumsuckers' entertainment and playthings when they were done. I can still hear them crying as they had knives to their throat, as they were assaulted. Then there is what they did to me. They used me in all ways possible. If they didn't beat me, they insulted me. They even made me assault the girls. They said they'd kill them slowly and their siblings if I didn't do it. So I did. God forgive me, I did. Tim just held her as she cried and continued. Then, the skinny scumsucker had his turn with me. He was brutal, Tim. Hurt me in ways I didn't think possible. When he finished, I thought it was over. But then I felt the belt on my neck. I couldn't breathe. I was struggling to breathe. And they all just laughed. The girls were terrified. All I could think at that moment was, please God, don't let my boy see me die like this. And then, everything went black. Tim could only hold her as she confessed all she had been through. Tim, I know I'm not perfect. Far from it even. But why would someone do something like that? Why do people like that exist? Kate just cried like she never cried before, pouring out all she suffered as if it were a bucket of water. Kate began to gather herself. I cannot be your wife anymore, Tim. Not just because of what I did to you, but for what I did to your family. I hurt and betrayed it more than I can ever know. You have a woman you can love in Jenny, Tim. I know you both have been seeing each other, and were there for each other after what I did. You deserve a woman who can love you as much as you love her, but who also respects and is loyal to only you. And that is something I have failed at. And it not only nearly cost me my life, but our families. She stood up and gave Tim a kiss as if they were lovers saying goodbye. I'm going to tell Andy that I'm sorry for what I did to him and try to get him to do, and that I'm signing the divorce papers, no questions asked. The Attorney General says that with everything I know I can bring down a system that is worldwide. I may not do jail time, but for now, I can't be around you or our children. I'm sorry for everything, Tim. All of it. Tim was dumbstruck by what he had heard. For a moment, despite everything she had put him through this past month, he forgave her. Especially with the horror he witnessed her go through, and for the first time, she held herself accountable for her actions. Goodbye, Karen. Goodbye, Tim. And with that, Tim left his wife alone for the last time. Andy arrived at her room as requested. She apologized for what she did to him, and signed the papers granting Tim primary custody. Tim stood at the door watching it all. Tim, I just have one thing. Tim stopped her by raising his hand. No matter what happens, you are their mother, and I will not keep them from you. Just call back when you can, and get the help you need. Texas Ranger Captain approached Karen, telling her that she will be guarded 24/7 by his people. Each one of them he trusts. As long as you send the woman who saved my son, I'll be fine with that. He smiled. Yes, ma'am, as soon as she recovers. Tim decided to call Jenny. She deserved to know what was happening. After everything she had been through with him, everything he shared with her, and the love he had with her. Yes, he loved Kate, but even though he forgave her and would save her again if he had to, he could never be with her again. That chapter has closed, and it's time for another. Hello, hey, we saw the news. Everyone is okay? Yeah, everyone is okay. Jenny heard the hoarse of Tim's voice. She was thankful Kate was alive, but knew that the success came at a cost emotionally. Family is all right. I can't share more than that, Jenny. I understand, Jenny responded. None of us knows for sure how things will work out with Jeannie, but you know Linda and I are there for you, regardless. I do, Tim replied, and that makes it easier. Those boys are going to need every bit of family they have left. As you said, she was one hell of a mother. Karen's parents arrived an hour later. The boys were asleep, and he was glad they were when Tim told them that Karen had been assaulted and torched, but will fully recover. They were both distraught, but her mom had to be medicated by the psychiatrist assigned to her grandsons after hearing the details of what Kate endured. While she was calming down, he wished he could resurrect Rogers, Slaughter, and the rest so he could torture them more and longer before they died. He knew Spieth had begged to die before he was dispatched, but if he could do it again, he would keep him alive longer. The only hope he had for extracting greater revenge lay in Boyd's discoveries when the film and tapes were reviewed. He relished the opportunity. The Travis Sheriff's Department investigator assigned to her case asked for a moment of his time, which he gave without protest. The questions were unremarkable, clarifying to him how little they knew rather than providing insight, and the investigator learned nothing from the bereaved husband. Tim did learn something, however. They had found the van with the severed fingers on a FM road near Pleasanton. Larry, Slaughter, and Benton had been identified by their fingerprints and were identifying the others one by one. Tim returned to the hospital, signed all the forms, agreed to have his son see a counselor for a while to help them deal with the trauma of their mother. Karen spoke to her children, told them that when things calms down, she will have to go away. But Mommy, I don't want you to go away. What if the bad men come back? Karen held back her tears. Boys, Mommy loves you very much, but Mommy is sick and has to get better. I want to be the best mommy for you. But you already are the best mommy. The boys were awake and were talking to and playing with their grandparents. Nate, the psychiatrist, and the counselor were with them. Tim held one on each knee and gently broke the news to them. He told them the mommy was hurt really bad by the bad men, and that the doctors had to help Mommy get better before they could see her. Patrick cried out, "Why did those bad men hurt Mommy so bad? Mommy is nice. She didn't do anything to deserve this." Mark cried with his brother, "I want to be with Mommy, so we can all go home." Mark cried softly, his tears wetting Daddy's shoulder, but Patrick responded by getting mad. "It was those mean men, wasn't it, Daddy? They were hurting her. I screamed at them, but they wouldn't stop. I want to find those men and hurt them bad, like they hurt Mommy." "So does Daddy, Patrick. So does Daddy. The lawmen will find the men, and they will be punished," Tim assured him. "No, 2 policemen were the ones who stole us. They shot another policeman and took us to the place where they hurt Mommy. I don't like policemen," Patrick declared. Tim hugged them both tightly. "Patrick and Mark, most lawmen are good, but sometimes one is bad. Those 2 are bad, but Ranger Jim is good, isn't he?" Patrick nodded, and then began crying. "I love Mommy." The next hour was brutal. Both boys were crying, both grandparents were crying, the psychiatrist and counselor were crying, and Nate and Tim cried from time to time as they tried to console everyone. The emotion finally exhausted everyone. Tim took the boys home in Nate's pickup. Nate followed with the parents, who were still too distraught to drive. Once everyone was settled in, Nate ran to Mr. Gaddy's to pick up pizza and spaghetti. Granny and Grandpa took the boys outside to run and play on their swing set. Tim called his parents and asked them to tell everyone down there. They said Linda had already told them, and they were ready to come up when Tim wanted them to. He asked them to wait until he called tomorrow. He then called Andy. There was no answer, so he called the Housemans. Jimmy told him Andy was meeting with the 2 girls, their parents, and the investigator assigned to their case. He also told Tim that Jim Boyd had secured a warrant without notice to search the AG's office, and he was there right now with another ranger he trusted. Jimmy asked if he would remain at his house, and promised to keep him informed when he heard more. The US AG was reunited with his daughter and has watched her like a hawk. Another investigator was handling her case due to political connections. Tim hesitated, knowing that the next call could have dire consequences if mishandled. He called anyway. Jeannie answered, "Hello," on the second ring. Tim hesitated. Speaking in a formal voice, he said, "Jeannie, this is Tim. I wanted to call and tell you how sorry I am that your husband is dead." Jeannie hesitated and responded the same way. "Thank you, Tim. I heard that Karen and your sons are safe. Thank God." Tim paused. "Jeannie, Karen is safe, but the thing they did to her. I found her while they assaulted her, Jeannie. She was strangled while they were doing it." A gasp escaped her lips. "My God, Tim, I'm so sorry. Despite everything, she didn't deserve that. She signed the papers. She granted me primary custody." Tim paused before he continued. "She is leaving when she is better. After everything that's happened, she's seeking help after the trail. I think that's best. How are you and the boys?" "We are hurting, hon. Thank God they are alive, but we are going to be hurting for a while. I just need a favor from you." "Of course, anything. Be there for me, be there for us. Because I'm going to need all the love, help, and I can get. I know you and your family is crushed. Just know I'll be there, Tim, like you were for me. I promise." Tim listened to the sound of her voice and wanted to rush to her. He needed her kindness, her love, and he needed it right now. But there was simply no way, so he declined her offer, made the same offer to her, and told her he hoped to offer condolences in person in the future. He asked about Larry. Jeannie told him that his parents would have a memorial in Chicago for his relatives, but nothing was planned in Texas because his body had not been recovered. They promised to keep each other informed and hung up. Nothing was said that would raise suspicion if they had the phone tapped, but it was a most unsatisfying call. Before he hung up, Joe came to the phone. "Tim, I overheard what happened to Karen and your boy. I'm so sorry. I know we have not known each other that long, Tim, but I have a profession for you, or more particular, Karen. Can you get a hold of that ranger? I think it's time we talk." A half hour later, Joe received a call from a secured line. He used his neighbors from down the street phone, making sure that his own friend from his military days was protecting his daughter and family, along with some of Tim's family and friends he volunteered. "Hello, Tim. Is he there?" "Yeah. What do you mean proposition, Joe?" Joe took a breath. "I have a friend from my military days. She has a place in Alaska. She can help Karen. Her specialty is sexual trauma and destructive behaviors. She helped with mass assaults in the Congo and Yugoslavia wars, among others. Tim, I'm not excusing what Karen did to you, but what she is going through is deeper than we know. There is a reason she did what she did way before this mess. She has some serious scars in her, Tim, and I give you my word my friend can help if Karen wants it. And don't worry about protection, Tim. You are not the only one who knows people with things that go bang, among other things. Karen's will have more protection than the president." Tim thought about it and looked to the ranger, then decked. "I'll let Karen know what you told me, and we will take it from there. And Joe, thank you for everything." "Of course, Tim. We are here for you, Tim, as you were for us." Robin stood in front of her parents' grave. The wind was slightly bothering her black eye patch on her left eye. When she was told she would lose all vision in her left eye, she took the news better than most, but it still hurt. She didn't want to be pitted, if anything, so to cope she would joke about it. "Hey, maybe I'll be a pirate now. But Mom, you have to make sure Dad doesn't drink all the rum. In fact, that goes for you too." A laugh left her lips. Despite them being gone for so long, she would come here to heal, as any child would want to be near their parents when things are so wrong. "I want to let you both know we got them, all of them. The people who took you away. It was convenient it was near the hospital because she lived here before she left for the army. All her childhood memories are here." Grasping with everything she had learned the past 2 weeks, she was shocked and disgusted what she learned from the details of the house assault. She thought about the girls who were kidnapped, who would never be the same with what they endured. But she thought about Karen and her son most of all. That little boy must have been terrified, seeing his mother taken away. And Karen, oh Karen, she is thankful she is alive. But the things those scumsuckers did to her, she grimed. A hit of shame hit her. What if I had been there sooner? I could have aimed better. I could have stopped them so that they wouldn't suffer. I could have. Stop beating yourself up would be a start. Robin was startled at the woman's voice and turned to see Karen, showing a slight smile. "I'm sorry if I scared you. I wanted to find you, and your captain brought us here. Said since you're. Realize you've been here a lot lately." Robin relaxed, surprised to see her, but calmed down regardless. "Yes, I come here on occasion to visit my parents. Sometime to share funny moment with them. Tell them events that happened. Sometime to ask for advice. My mom and dad met on a hill. Think they even conceived me on one of their dates. So, they got the best view of the city from here." Robin took a breath before speaking. I'm sorry for not saving you and your son. If I had been quicker, then those girls at the house with me still would have been assaulted and eventually killed. Robin was taken aback. Robin, you saved my son, Mark, from being taken. Then you shot and killed men who betrayed us. Then you slowed down their escape by disabling their vehicle and wounding another of their men, granting critical time for Tim to save me, my son, and 3 teenage girls, reuniting them with their family. I can hold my sons again in large part of you. If anything, Ranger Albin, you did anything but fail us. We are all alive in large part of you. Karen suddenly hugged her, tears falling from her face. Thank you for saving me and my family. Tears fell from Robin's eye, returning the hug as well. It was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. I think it's time to make leave. The cap's voice spoke up. Robin, I'd like you to meet your new assignment. You will be guarding Karen until her departure. Robin was confused. Before you say anything, you have shown me exactly why you are one of my best. You not only prevented Karen and her son dying with the critical time you gave, but you did it while risking your life for someone you never met. Yes, Robin, I know what I'm doing. And just so you know, even though I was going to give you the task anyway, Karen made the request. She just wanted to meet the ranger who helped save her and her family. Robin could not hide the smile that came to her face. I'm dissipated about one thing, Robin. Shameful if you ask me. Robin's emotions were dashed, her face broken. You are clearly out of uniform. Robin was shocked when she saw the captain pull out a silver circle star, the word Sergeant engraved in its center. The ceremony will happen due to the nature of your assignment. But for now, the captain saluted, and Robin retuned it. Congratulations, Sergeant Robin Albin. Robin shed a tear in her eye. Now, as I mentioned before, you'll be guarding Karen until she leaves. She will be going to an undisclosed location. She will be hiding out until trial, as well as rehabilitation. She will be safe, Robin. Karen nodded in agreement. I spoke with a friend of my ex-husband. Apparently, her knows someone who can help me with everything that's happened. They are deciding for the specialist and housing. It breaks my heart to leave my babies. But if I'm going to survive and be a true mother to my boys, I must do this. I just ask that you be with me until I leave. Robin nodded. Of course, Karen. I'll never leave your side. And you have my word, you and your family will be safe. Robin gave her hand to shake, but Karen hugged her instead. Thank you, Sergeant Albin. With the 3 made their way to the cars downhill and drove to Karen's parents' home, where everyone including the boys and Jenny were waiting. At the house, Tim was sitting on the deck with Jenny, thinking of all that had happened this past month. The insanity of it all. What started out as cheating and abusive spouses came to the horror that engulfed them and so many others. These past weeks have been an emotional roller coaster to Tim, and yet he could not nor would deny how Jenny was his rock through it all. He learned to love again because of her, and even to forgive and move on. He turned to her and spoke. I want to say thank you for everything you have done for me, for being there for me. My boys, thank you, Jean. I want to build what we have together and never stop. I want to wake up and see you there. I will always love Karen. She is the mother of my children and was my wife for years before all this happened. But my heart belongs to you now. I love you. Jenny shed a tear before taking Tim into her arms. I love you too, Tim Kelly. You were there for me when I wasn't even there for myself when my husband beat on me. You helped not just rebuild but strengthen whatever broken shell of a person I was. If you'll have me, I'll never leave you or the boys. As their lips locked in a passionate kiss, a black Dodge Charge pulled up. Tim almost reached for his 35.7 Magnum when he saw it was Captain Davis leaving the driver's seat, and now Sergeant Albin out of the passenger seat. But what surprised them was Karen stepping out of the back seat. Jenny couldn't help but feel awkward of the situation. Hello, Tim, Karen spoke before embracing him in a hug. Hello, Karen, Tim responded. Jenny then spoke. I think this is my cue. Actually, Jenny, I would to you, if that is all right. Please. Tim and Jean were taken aback for a moment. A look of concern lightly showed. Janine, along with Tim and these two, we have a small army including the following here. Texas Rangers handpicked by the Captain Nate and a few of Tim's family, and a few friends of your father. Not to mention that with everything you've been through, I'm more than sure you can kick my butt without breaking a sweat. So, you really have nothing to worry about. I promise I only want to talk to you. At that point, Jenny nodded, then looked at Tim and the others. Would you mind giving us a moment? Tim and the captain went inside. I'll stand in the yard a bit. That swing bench looks comfortable. Robin smiled, nodded at both women. When the deck was clear, Jenny spoke first. So that her? The one who saved Mark? And gave Tim the time he needed to. Jenny stopped herself. I'm sorry. It's only been a few weeks. I didn't mean to. It's all right, Jenny. You didn't cause it. None of this. This falls on me, not you. The cheating, the tapes, whether I knew how sick and twisted this was or not, it's all on me. Karen paused to take a breath before she spoke again. I want to apologize for cheating on you with you, husband. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't care. But after everything that has happened, let's just say I'm seeing things in a different perspective. If you want to insult me, curse me, beat me to a pulp, I won't stop you. In fact, I deserve it for putting you in that position. I heard about what happened when your husband came home after the cabin. You confronted him and had every right to. But then the scumsucker beat you. Because you bruised his pathetic ego. Because of me. Karen began to cry softly. I know it is a lot to ask, and I doubt we'll be friends. That is something I'm not worthy of. But I ask with complete humility, if you can forgive me, but also, to take care of my family? Jenny was speechless for a moment. At one point in her life, she wanted nothing more than to beat this woman to a pulp. She remembered the days and nights she saw the pain in Tim's eyes, the man she loved with every fiber of her being. The time he would force a smile but break when he thought she wasn't looking. The moments when he spoke about what he saw and how it broke him. The blatant lying and disrespect of the man Karen once claimed to love. The humiliation of what she put him through, making him an unknowing cuck to be mocked and laughed at. And to top it off, the witch who screwed her own husband, just for her husband to beat her when she had the audacity to confront him about his marriage vow. There was no doubt in her mind. She wanted to hurt this woman for everything she did. But that woman was not standing in front of her. That woman was selfish, arrogant, and had an ego the size of Texas. But this woman was different. This woman fought for her child and was willing to give her life for him. And technically she did, but was brought back by Tim. This woman is looking at the havoc and chaos she has caused and has shown remorse. This woman, who was violated in the vilest of ways, has paid her dues 1,000-fold and is setting to make things right again, even coming to the woman whom she willingly wronged to apologize in person. Jenny had to admit that she truly respected that. You know, I truly hated you for what you did. I wanted to hurt you in any way possible for what you put me, Tim, and the kids through. You were a truly despicable human being in my eyes. You had a man who loved you and would give you the world, worshipped the ground you walked on. 2 beautiful children, a beautiful home. You were loved by both faculty and students at the high school. Most women would kill for a sliver of a life like that, me included. All I had was the honor of being a trophy wife to an insufferable narcissistic wife-beater who had me convinced he really loved me for years, when all I was his emotional and actual punching bag. All this, while his 304s made a joke out of me and my marriage. Karen knew that last insult was meant for her, and it stung. She lowered her head in shame. I deserve that. But Jenny spoke again. You did not deserve what happened to you. Tim told me what he saw when he found you. Karen let a tear fall and began to lightly shake. I, still, have dreams about it. I'm in that disgusting bed with those scumsuckers. I feel the belt around my neck. My baby, Patrick, at the door crying. Yet no matter how hard I fight, I can't reach him. And I hear that sick son of a witch laugh behind me. His belt getting tighter and tighter. And I'm choking and I can't breathe. My baby keeps calling for me, and I'm choking, and I can't reach him. I wake up out of breath and cold sweats. Still, if I was in that situation again, knowing full well I would die, but Patrick or Mark for that matter would live, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Tears begin to fall. She suddenly felt Jenny's hand on hers, a look of compassion in her eyes. Tim also told me how you protected Patrick, how despite what you knew what was going to happen, you remained strong for him. How you told him you loved him to the moon and beyond. A selfish woman would never do that. Only a loving mother who would do anything to protect her child would. Yes, Karen, I forgive you. And I want you to be the best mother that Mark and Patrick can have. And not only will I take care of them, but I will love them as if they are my own. You have my word on that. Both women gave a tearful hug. Karen could not help but reply, thank you. Thank you for being there for Tim and the kids when I could not. Please love him as much as you can and more. I messed up a beautiful thing when I hurt him. You have the treasure of his love now. And make no mistake, that is a treasure in every sense of the word, that man will move heaven and earth for you. And fight the devil and his minions with a smile to protect you. I should know. But I messed that up. I saw how he looks at you. Jenny, I implore you to not make the mistake I made. Don't take him for granted. I was the idiot in this situation. There doesn't need to be a second. Jenny smiled at Karen's words, wondering how things could have been different if things didn't turn out the way they did. They could have been best friends. She thinks to herself that maybe one day they can. Suddenly the door opens. Mark and Patrick coming out to hug their mother. "Mommy, you're home." Karen hugged them as tight as she could. "Oh, my babies, I could never stay away from you." She then turned to see her parents. Tears of joy ran down their face as they came to hug their daughter. Her father broke down in tears when he hugged her with her mother. "Our baby is home safe." "Oh, thank God. Thank God." The group hugged Karen together, afraid to let go. "We almost lost you, baby. Tim and the captain told us what happened." Her mother barely let out the words. She looked in the doorway and saw Tim leaning on the frame, giving a faint smile. For the first time in weeks, Karen felt something she did not think possible. Something she took for granted on a regular basis. The very thing she squandered but now had and would never take for granted again. The love and support of her family. Suddenly, Karen spots a car pull into the driveway. A man who looks to be in his 50s steps out the driver's side. In the passenger, a woman who appears to be in her mid-30s. She is beautiful with her short cut but raven dark hair. A slender build stand at 5 feet 5 inches. She is wearing blue jeans, a black blouse and blazer, and is wearing black casual shoe. "Dad, you made it." Jenny left the deck to greet her father, embracing him in a tight hug. "It's good to see you, to baby. I got that friend here I was talking about." "Hello, you must be Jenny. My name is Dr. Alice Stevens. It is a pleasure to meet you." As the women were getting acquainted, Karen made the way to the doctor. The doctor observed her. She seemed a shadow of the woman she was told about. This wild child who could get any man she wants and party into the nice. Looks like a shell of what she once was. However, the doctor noticed a sense of drive to be better. In time show would see. "Hello, Karen. It is nice to finally meet you. However, I understand it would be best under other circumstances. I understand you know who I am and why I'm here at this point." Karen nodded. "Yes, to help me get better, so that I can go to trial and testify without sound like a nut." "Yes, that's part of it. But the core is to help you live the rest of your life, Karen. Walk with me inside, please." Karen did as asked as the women spoke. "I will not lie to you, Karen. This will be difficult. Yes, treatment will be done here at home to aid you, but it will not stop after trial. If you are all right with this, you will come home with me to Alaska. For both yours and your family's safety. You will be able to communicate, but will be controlled and secure. And it will vary when you can do so. Karen, what you suffered was horrible, but based on what I have on you so far, I think this is beyond that. I will ask you tough questions, Karen, some of which will seem disrespectful and flat-out cruel. But this question, I promise you, will help you more than hurt you. The man you saw me with, Joe, is an old friend who once helped me years ago. You see, Karen, you and I are more alike than you realize." Karen seemed confused when she saw the doctor take her jacket off. She saw a beautiful tattoo down the sleeve of her right arm. It was that of a phoenix flying from what appeared to be a large fire that was inked into the back right hand, some of its tail feather in the flame itself. Yet fire coated the bird. She then walked to her and tuned her neck to her to see what looked like a barcode. The numbers 20, 1, 13, 5, and 4 in the code. The numbers are the numeral opposite of the alphabet. It spells out the word, tamed. I was sex trafficked from the age of 16 to 24. I ran away from home, fell into the wrong crowd who I thought were my friends because like all 16-year-olds I knew everything. Thing about friends is, they have a tendency of not building your trust and love for them, just to betray you by dropping you off like property to an outfit they owe money to. I was robbed of many things that night. My love and trust of my friends, my mother and father's love, and my innocence. When the group was finished, they just forced me in a van as if I was dirt. They gave me this barcode to label me there. And for the next 8 years, I was in every sense of the word. I fought at first, of course, but enough broken bones and threat of death can scare any child. I was their toy used for clients all around the world. It was my life. There was once a term I heard called, grape them to break them. I'm sad to say there was truth in that for me. They used me in every way possible, kept breaking me until there was nothing left to break. I no longer saw myself as human, only an object. I became numb to the horrors I endured, and yet surprised and shocked every time. I was going to end it until Joe saved me. He was a part of a unit that fought against human trafficking. After 8 years of hell, I was going home. When I arrived, I learned my father had died trying to find me. He apparently asked the wrong people the wrong questions, and they killed him. My mother, although thankful and happy to see me again, would die months later due to cancer. Joe looked after me, got me the medical and therapy I needed. But I wanted to do more. I wanted to prevent other girls from suffering my fate, keep other families from going through what mine did. I got my GED, as well as my bachelor's and master's with Joe's help. and I have helped many and plan to help more. I may have been broken, but I became stronger than ever when I rebuilt myself again. I keep this tattoo as a reminder of where I've been and what I've seen, and a drive to protect others from it. So, you see, Karen, we are a lot more alike than you think. Karen was dumbstruck by her words. Sex trafficked at such a young age. To be used by so many and then tossed away like toilet paper, completely broken. And yet the woman in front of her was anything but broken. She was strong, a woman who weathered the storm and won. And Karen realized she wanted that, needed that. Not just for her, but for her sons. I want to go. Alice nodded. Okay, then we need to let everyone know what's going to happen. For the next half hour, Karen and Alice explained where Karen would be going. That she would be gone for a year after the trails have ended. That she would seek treatment and provided safety for herself and her family. When the boys heard this, they were devastated. Patrick took it the hardest, because he there when his mother was hurt. He cried and ran to her, holding her as tight as his little arms would allow him. He was looked straight into her in the eyes. Please don't leave, Mom. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you more. I was too weak. I promise I'll be stronger and protect you. The bad men will never hurt you again. I swear. Just please don't leave. There was not a dry eye in that room. Tim let tears fall only as Mark cried in his arms. Karen's parents held each other in their arms. Alice removed her glasses as the tears began to escape her eye. Everyone else merely followed suit. Karen gave a sad but gentle smile as her tears fell. She knelt to her son and held him. Then she places her hand on his face and brought his to hers, and spoke in her most gentle and reassuring voice. Hey, who said my little strong man was weak? I'll kick his butt from here to Sunday. Her joke got a slight laugh and smile on Patrick's face. Do you remember when the bad man brought you to me? How scared I looked. Patrick nodded slowly. The bad man threatened to hurt you. You remember? Again, Patrick nodded. Well, I also remember a certain little man who told them don't hurt my mommy, all while fighting them tooth and nail. I saw that kick to the chin you gave the guy who thought it'd be a good idea to shoulder lift you. Karen winked at her son, causing him to slightly smile in pride. You are not weak by any means, honey. You fought for me as I fought for you. And I'm so proud of you for being so brave. So, Mommy is going to say to you what I said back then. I love you and your brother to the moon and beyond. I want you to listen and love your daddy, because he loves you as much as I do. But now that I'm going away, I need you to be strong for me, okay? I also need you to protect your brother. You're his big brother, and it's a very important job to keep him safe when Mommy or Daddy isn't around, okay? Need you to make sure the bad men don't hurt him. He is smaller than you, so you must protect him and keep him safe for me, okay, honey? Patrick tearfully nodded. I know this hurts, but I promise to always stay in touch. Write you every chance I get, even send you hello videos to keep you posted, and you and your brother can do the same. And when this is all over and Mommy is all better, I will come back and never leave you again. Patrick hugged his mom with all her strength and was soon joined by Mark. I love you boys so much. Mark spoke up when he passed his sniffles. Where are you going, Mommy? Karen spoke. I can't tell you that, baby, but just know it will be very cold. Like the North Pole? Where Santa lives? Can you get him to bring Rudolph this year? I like his red nose. Yeah, Rudolph is cool. Karen glanced at Tim, as if speaking in code without talking. As if he could read her mind, Tim gave a nod, suggesting her had that already planned. I think I may be able to work something out, honey. Awesome. Yeah, cool. The mood of the boys brought laughter to the somber mood of the room. All had dinner as family and friends that night. Karen slept in the living room, while Tim and Jenny slept in the guest room. It felt strange to Karen that she once jealous of Jenny sleeping in the same room as her ex. But then she remembers their talk earlier and recognized it as the best situation. Robin stayed the night and slept on the other couch while Nate had a sleeping bag and slept behind the couch, as a ranger stood watch. So much has happened. But despite that, tomorrow is a day that opens the chance for change. And change will come into their lives indeed. The smell of Karen's bacon frying and coffee brewing woke Nate, and then Karen's parents. The boys were already playing in the living room. They were not as sad, but also not their eager, happy selves. The breakfast of eggs, bacon, biscuits, milk, and coffee, with pleasant conversation, got the day started in a good way. After escorting the boys outside, Granny leaned back inside the door and asked Tim to call and find out if they had learned anything else. He nodded and went to the phone. His first call was to the sheriff's department investigator. He had no further news. His second call was to Andy and let him know if he wanted to come by for breakfast. The third call was incoming from Jim Boyd. He asked Tim when he and the other investigator could interview him. Tim replied that they could, but in a neutral setting. Boyd suggested the Houseman residence in an hour. The conversation took place around the Houseman's dining room table, with Boyd and Terry sitting across from Tim and Nate. Jimmy, Patty, and Andy sat on the ends of the big table and listened. Boyd deferred to Ranger Terry, who asked the standard questions law enforcement asks when on a fishing expedition. Tim answered promptly and confidently, without any guidance from the three attorneys present, leaving Terry with the impression he had nothing to hide and nothing to add to the investigation. A few questions were asked of Nate, but he feigned ignorance of anything beyond what Tim had told the investigator. Ranger Terry excused himself at 4:30, saying he had promised his daughter he would be at her cheerleading tryouts at 6. When Terry was gone, Boyd checked the room for bugs while the others chatted and then rejoined the group. Nate is also your client, correct? Boyd asked the lawyers. Nate pulled 3 20s out of his pocket and handed one to each. They answered that he is. Good. Tim and Nate, we'll limit this conversation, okay? They both nodded, and Boyd continued. Based on information provided by Andy's clients, Ranger Terry and I executed a search warrant on the offices of a state official. What we found was extremely disturbing, to say the least. In fact, it was disgusting. I can't go into details, but we made copies and gave the originals to a highly placed friend at the FBI. We placed the copies in various places because we aren't sure what the FIBs will do when they examine the evidence. Even with Karen's and the other testimony, it is uncertain. We do know many powerful people are at risk, and they are going to do anything in their power to keep it from getting out. It may be that deals are struck, some people resign, and some go unpunished. Or it may be that they throw the organized crime book at them and burn the whole bunch. Terry and I will be armed and vigilant at all times, and I suggest you do the same, Tim. No one knows what role you played, if any, but your name is associated with this mess, so watch your 6. Now, Esquires, can I have a few minutes alone with the brothers? I promise no interrogation. The lawyers left the room, shutting the door behind them. Tim, did you ever watch the videos you got from Rogers's house? Most, not all, Tim replied. Why? We need to watch them now, if you still have them here. This shit started well before Karen, and includes far more women. It goes to the highest levels of the state, and way up into the federal branch, not to mention some names everyone knows from sports, entertainment, and business. If any of them are on those tapes, we need to know it. Boyd told him urgently. Can we trust all 3 attorneys, or do we need to go somewhere? Tim assured him they had already watched a number of the videos and were completely trustworthy. The quiet laughter died when they entered the den with serious faces. Jimmy retrieved the videos from his walk-in safe, and they looked at the titles trying to find a clue to content. 2 tapes without labels were bound together with plastic wrap. They appear to be unused, but Tim thought one appeared to be only partially used or rewound, so they put it in, rewound it, and hit play. Both tapes were T200 that were recorded in LP format, meaning they ran over 400 minutes each. After watching for an hour, they knew that sexual encounters had been filmed back-to-back. In order to determine the participants, they would need to watch every encounter. One thing was already certain. Spieth's allegation that the rich, famous, and powerful were deeply involved was fact. Tim needed to get back to his family, as did Boyd. So they asked the Housemans to make 3 copies, secure the originals and 1 copy, and provide 1 to Tim and 1 copy to Jim Boyd. They agreed, and said they would keep copies locked up in their safe until they could be watched by the group at a future date. Before you leave, Sharon, Jana, and their parents are allowing me to keep you 3 informed. Patty, can we borrow your office? 30 minutes later, they were headed home, pleased that the girls' interview with the sheriff's investigators went as they had hoped. The house was full when Nate and Tim arrived. The boys were busy entertaining Karen, his parents, his sister Jan and husband Gary, and Nate's wife Linda. Karen's parents were fixing hamburgers with all the trimmings, with Grandpa Paul tending the pit and Granny Beth washing, slicing, and putting it on trays. The Simpades had been given to Karen, Paul, and Beth for what they all endured before they arrived, and to Tim when he arrived. His family was huggers, and more than a few tears were shed during the hugs, especially by his mother. Linda gave him a bear hug, whispered that she loved him and his boys, and to take care of each other. Everyone gathered in the living room after the meal and cleanup to watch the boys play slowly out and talk. Their grandmothers bathed them at 7:30, and their mommy and daddy put them to bed with a story he didn't get to finish before they were sound asleep. Tim had returned to the adult conversation and was about to take his seat when the phone rang. He took it in the kitchen and was shocked to hear, "Hey, Primo. Good to hear your voice. It's been a long time." Tim stepped back into the doorway and signaled Nate to come. "Buenas noches, Primo Martin. ¿Cómo estás?" Nate's interest level jumped at the name, and Tim held the phone where he could hear. Estoy bien, Timidio, unlike a lot of your acquaintances and enemigos. Tejas is a dangerous place, no? Sí, for some. For others not so much. Tim replied. Lamento mucho que hayas perdido a tu bella esposa, Martin said sadly. She is a strong and lovely woman and fine mother to your sons. I know I don't need to tell you that we had nothing to do with it, even though someone tried to make it look like we did, verdad? Los Cabrons did need killing. But I haven't heard the official version, but from what I've heard, it sounds like some drug deal gone wrong. I never thought of you Y2 Grupo though. I'm sure you were in Mexico at your house on Lago Azucar, no? Yes, I was, and our local connection was not involved either. But we're amigos. You know I would never hurt su esposa o his hijos. I do know, primo, just as I would never hurt yours, Tim answered quickly. Both knew their answers were conditional, but that's what needed to be said, because Martin was about to make an offer. I guess the pendejos who dismembered the bodies al Lago and those that left the cut-off fingers near Pleasanton thought they could use the signatures of some Mexican bandidos to throw the authorities off their scent. You think maybe they knew we could never be convicted because we were innocent and had good alibis? There are some well-connected pendejos in Tejas who have a good idea of who is involved, who isn't, and who has the alibi to prove they weren't. I heard the clues were inconsistent. Some of one group of bandits, some of another. It seems the lawmen are very confused about the fingers, but they aren't looking too hard because those guys were all wanted and the coroner says the fingers were cut off dead people, proving they are dead. I don't know that much about what happened over at the lake, but it seems like they're just trying to find out who the body remains belong to. You don't know, do you? No, sí, pero I'll ask around if you want me to, Martin answered. I know you, primo. You are going to want to know who did this to your wife, your kids, and those other chicas jovens the news talks about. Lo me quieres? Por favor, primo Martin. I do want to know, and I may need help when I find out, Tim explained. Para mi primo Teo, anything I can do, gratis. Martin responded. Bueno, la más I sabes más, por favor, Tim requested. Nate shook his head in wonderment as they returned to the living room, where everyone was quiet. Their dad, John Michael, asked, interesting conversation. Who was it? A very unexpected call, Tim answered. From cousin Martin. He expressed his condolences and asked if he could help in any way. I thought I heard you calling him Primo Martin. Who is he? Karen's dad asked. He's not really a cousin. In South Texas and northern Mexico, calling someone Primo is claiming them as your cousin, whether they are a relative or not. I met him back when I was a sophomore in college. We had some problems that he helped us with back then. He offered to help again, and I asked him to let me know if he learned anything important. He's an important man in Mexico and has influence in Texas, so who knows? Maybe he can help again, Tim explained. The next day, Karen placed her clothing in her suitcase. It was time to leave. She spoke to Alice in what was to be expected in Alaska, so she prepped accordingly. They went over how they would drive with Sergeant Albin and others, then switch vehicles in San Antino, then switch in an RV to Santa Fe, New Mexico, then take a final car ride to a private airport and make their way to Alaska. Tim had his people and Texas Ranger track the entire thing so that she would be safe. Joe had his people in Alaska on standby and would confirm her landing and making it to her destination safely. All parties also insisted that she learn how to shoot. And despite her short time learning, she has proven to be very skilled due to Sergeant Sabin's training. Interest enough of friendship formed between the two. She noticed her and Andy getting closer, and Karen would tease her about it. It was good seeing her smile again. And she knew this day was coming, but she dreaded nonetheless. The U.S. attorney decided that it would be best that Karen and the girls videotaped their testimony. Not so much for emotional duress, but the corruption saw so rancid, they could not guarantee a conviction. Karen was heartbroken by the news. However, she was resolved. She can sleep better knowing that she fought them in some way, shape, or form. As she made her way to the living room, she saw her parents and sons wadding. They all shared in one final hug and said their tearful goodbyes. Karen then lowered herself to her sons. Remember what I said, okay? Protect each other and look out for your father too. We both love you very much. And most importantly, this is not goodbye, it's what? Both boys gave a tearful but hopeful smile. This is I'll see you later. That's right, and I promise you my babies I will see you later. Making her way to the SUV, she saw Robin, Andy, and Tim. She noticed Andy talking to Robin and saw a smile on her face. Tim just looked at her, seeing a smile that she thought she would never see. All right, let's get moving. Alice spoke up. Everyone gathering themselves. As Karen placed the suitcase in the back, she turned to Tim, hugging him one last time. Again, I'm sorry for every wrong thing I have done to you, Tim. I hope and pray things with you and Jenny continue to grow and strengthen. I'm glad you found someone who could love you better than I can, Tim. And thank you for all you gave me. You gave me two of the most precious things I ever received. Your love and our babies. Keep them safe for me, Tim. Promise me. Tim looked at his former wife and mother of his children with a peace and serenity he thought had never felt towards her. I promise. Just promise me our boy's mother will always be in their lives. Of course. I must get going now. Closing the door, she lets down the window. Thank you, Tim. Again, thank you. I'll always love you for what you have done for me. With that, the SUV drove off. Linda, Nate, Tim, and their dad were drinking coffee in the living room, talking softly and watching the early news with the volume turned low, when Tim bolted upright and increased the volume slightly. A replay of the Attorney General's update on the fire, given last night just before the 10 p.m. news, was on. He was praising the fine work done by AG Spieth, describing him as a man of character and courage, and pledging to bring to justice those who killed him. Tim looked at Nate in disbelief. So that is the way they are going to play this? They've got the tape. They know goddamn well what happened. Okay, that's it. Screw them all. Time to use the nuclear option. Tim left the wide-eyed group in the living room and called Jim Boyd from the kitchen. Good morning. I've been expecting your call since last night, Tim. Before you go off on the phone, can you meet me for breakfast at that little place we both like? We need to talk. Tim agreed and got dressed. I have a meeting with the ranger heading the investigation. I'll be back in an hour, or I'll call you. Tim took the roundabout route, making sure he wasn't followed, based on Jim's intimation on the phone. Boyd was sitting in the last booth in the back with 2 cups of coffee. Tim started to speak, but the ranger cut him off. Just listen, and then I'll listen, okay? Tim nodded, and Boyd began. Too many of the big boys are all at risk, and they are closing ranks. I'm not sure what I'm going to be able to do. Got any ideas? I do, Tim answered. Because I anticipated this. Do you want to know? Or would you prefer plausible deniability? In for a penny, in for a pound, my friend. What's your plan? Boyd replied. Tim nodded, looked around to make sure no one could see his mouth moving, and enlightened the ranger. I have a friend from college who is a rising star in television news. She's hungry, she's dedicated, she believes in the First Amendment safeguards of our liberty, as she loudly puts it, and she will follow a story into a minefield. She's also very smart, and nothing pisses her off like privileged arrogance, misuse of power, and cover-ups. I'm going to leak a good chunk of video and audio to her, give her a chance to build up an audience, and then give her even more. When is the AG going to speak on this again? Not until Thursday morning at 11, unless we give him something earlier, Boyd said. Don't, Tim commanded. That will be perfect. She will be in Austin for the PC, I promise. Will other law enforcement officers be up there with him? Will you? Yes and no. I'm second in charge in case they need a fall guy, but I'm being told what I can and cannot say and do. I'm not important enough to be on stage with them. Well, good. That means you've got about 75 hours to find a bomb shelter, Tim warned. The AG pompously took the microphone and gave his update. He was flanked by the DPS chief, the law and order lieutenant governor, and several staunch law and order legislators. He finished his address, again praising AG Spieth, and offered to answer questions from his pet reporters for the elucidation of his adoring public. The first few softballs from his pet newsmen he handled smoothly, but then, Carol and unleashed a barrage of questions. AG West grew more flustered as the gorgeous redhead laid out the highly informed questions, and the men behind him began to shrink. He tried to bluster and threaten his way out of the quagmire by calling Carol Ann's questions ill-informed and slanderous, but several other news people seemed to also have been previously informed, and he was given no slack. By the time his PR person got him off the stage, citing other obligations, the chum was in the water and the sharks were circling. On the way off the stage, the lieutenant governor accosted West and the others and ordered them to follow him to a meeting in his office. Unfortunately for the light governor, by the time he took the short walk to his office in the Capitol, his wife was on the phone ranting and raving about a video she received. She was so angry he could barely understand her, but he did understand her finishing statement. How could you? You have daughters that age. You perv. He returned the phone to its cradle, looked at the group of men, and, ignoring his female secretary and aide, said, "We're screwed." With that call, the focus of the meeting suddenly turned from how to discredit the reporter and find out where she got the damning information, to how to salvage anything. their offices, their power, or their marriages. That very day, discreetly edited videos that masked the faces and private parts of apparently young girls having sex with old men whose faces were not masked began playing on the Houston station where Carolyn worked. Among the easily identified were AG Spieth, AG West, Lieutenant Governor Daniels, and several legislative leaders. Business magnates got their moment in the sun a few days later, as did a senator and 3 congressional representatives. By this time, the whole country was abuzz about the shenanigans in Texas, and feminists and religious leaders called for their heads. Some of the religious leaders dropped out of the hunt for heads the second week, when their heads appeared in flagrante delicto on videos, and one feminist leader left the U.S. to live abroad just before her debut. A number of moving vans were seen in the West Austin neighborhoods favored by the rich and powerful over the next few days and weeks, and the top divorce lawyers were swamped. The governor kept a low profile, simply announcing he would let the system handle this, and then take action as needed. By the end of the second week, he was breathing a little more deeply, his heart rate was back under 120, and then he found him sitting at his dining table with his wife, who looked pissed. The governor's video never aired, but his resignation as governor in order to return to his law practice was published 2 days later. One of his last official actions was to appoint Jim Boyd as the director of the Department of Public Safety, replacing the recently deceased director who died at his own hand by gunshot soon after his video aired. "Thank you for being here." Dead silence reigned while Tim took his seat. Jeannie stared out the passenger window of her dad's SUV, watching the brush fly by as they headed east to I-35 and then north to San Antonio. She appeared relaxed, but her countenance was stern, her body still, and her eyes never wavered. "A penny for your thoughts," offered her dad. "I doubt they are any different from yours, Daddy." Concern for Tim's boys and wife. Concern for Tim and those who go with him. Anger at those responsible. "Sound about right?" she replied without turning her head. "Pretty much. Add in a lot of prayer, and we're real close. You know he has to do this, right, honey?" "I know, Dad." After hearing the confessions, and then his children and Karen being taken by a ranger and deputy, he's absolutely certain he can't rely on anyone else. "I know that, but it doesn't make it easier, does it?" It grew quiet again as the lights of San Antonio grew brighter and the ranch fell further behind. Jeannie leaned her seat back, put her bare feet on the dash, and lay back. The memory of cutting her husband in two with the shotgun, so easily pushed aside in the heat of battle and the aftermath, crawled back into her thoughts. How could she have so cavalierly taken the life of someone she had loved, had pledged to spend her life with? At the time, it was an obvious decision. Kill or be killed. Now, second thoughts and other options crept into her conscience. You really didn't have a choice, baby. He came after you with the stated intention of taking you, letting men use you for sex, making movies of them doing it, and then selling you to the highest bidder. Yes, he was your husband, but in name only. He relinquished that position when he began cheating on you and beating you for not trusting him when he blatantly lied. If you hadn't pulled the trigger, he would have killed Tim, maybe me too, and taken you. Don't let doubts creep in. You had no choice. She knew that, but having her dad say it aloud did help. She turned her thoughts back to Tim and his desperate quest. The possibilities were so terrifying she had trouble examining them, but she made herself. He could be successful, rescue his wife and children, and carry them to freedom. If that happened, would he reconcile with Karen? That possibility hurt her heart because she knew she loved him. He could rescue his family, but be arrested by those in power who couldn't let the story get out. He could find his family dead, kill all those responsible, and spend the rest of his life in prison, his claims discredited by the corrupt politicians who hold power. He could die trying. The only appealing outcome she could conjure up was, he safely rescues his family but divorces Karen, marries her, and they live happily ever after. That made her smile, but only briefly. The odds were bad. Yet that's what happened. Everything that has happened brought them together. The lying, cheating, abuse, violence, and now here at this. Once home, Joe parked in the garage, lowered the doors, exited the vehicle with pistol in hand, and bade her follow him. Amelia and Kathy were waiting just inside. They hugged each other and exchanged greetings and "I love yous." Joe turned back to his younger daughter, grasped her by her upper arms, and in a caring but firm voice, asked, "Did you see the checkpoints as we neared the neighborhood, Jeannie? Did you see the brief flash from the trees as we approached the house?" She looked confused and shook her head. "Those are my people, but what if they weren't? I hate that we find ourselves in this situation, but you must be alert and watchful. Your life and our lives may depend on it. We don't know who they are, or what they know or don't know, but they do know you are Larry's wife and they put a bounty on you. What happened in South Texas doesn't change that. You are still in mortal danger, and as a result, so are your sister, mother, father, and anyone you're with. The danger didn't end because some of them are dead. If anything, the price on your head went up, and I have one on mine. Your mom and sis would be collateral damage or good hostages and nothing more, but we have to assume those highly placed officials still want you for the same purposes. I'm sorry I have to kick you while you're down, but you don't have the luxury of stumbling through these times in a fog of regret and fear. We need the genie from the ranch, not our little princess. Jeannie grabbed her daddy around the waist, hugged herself to him, and sobbed. Her mother and sister surrounded and hugged her too, and they cried on her while her dad stroked her hair and told her to cry it out, because she would need to be strong today, tonight, and for the foreseeable future. She had no idea she had that many tears to shed, but after several minutes of sobbing, she felt a strange relief, a calmness, and a sense of resolution setting in. Her mom and Kathy had long since stopped sobbing and were simply holding her. Finally, she turned her daddy loose, straightened, and said, "Thank you, my precious family. I needed that. I guess I had to get that out of my system to face the horrors of the past month and the murky and frightening present and future. Mom, Kathy, let's sit around the kitchen table and get you up to speed." The update took well over an hour, because Jeannie and Joe were brutally honest in recounting the story and in describing the current situation and plans. There were several times when Kathy gasped and grabbed her chest, and a number of times when her mother shook her head and closed her eyes, barely able to stomach the thought of what happened. It was one thing to hear the stories of Joe's experiences in Vietnam before she knew him. It was quite another to have her baby girl involved in such events. All four of them had tears in their eyes from time to time, but they accepted that some things just have to be done. While the conversation was still fresh on their minds, Joe showed Jeannie where he had stashed various guns around the house and encouraged her to keep the .38 special in her purse. He handed similar small pistols to his wife and older daughter with the same instructions, and then they devised a plan to defend themselves should an attack make it past the guards. Joe again warned all three of his girls that safety needed to be paramount in their thinking at all times. To think, 6 weeks ago I was married to Larry and had no idea all this was going on around me, Jeannie stated, and shook her head in disbelief. I must have been deaf and blind, and I was definitely an idiot for not leaving the first time he hit me, which was not even 6 months after we were married. Looking back on it, from the beginning, I wanted him to be something he wasn't. I ignored what I didn't like, built up what I did, and clung to him like a mindless twit. It's no wonder he had no respect for me. Sweetie, I'm afraid part of your problem was your dad and me. You were so happy, outgoing, and carefree as a child and teenager, and you were always the prettiest and most popular girl in the school. We failed to prepare you for the difficulties you would face, much less for charlatans like Larry. That was a hard lesson to learn, but you've dealt with it now, and all you can do is learn from your mistakes and forge ahead. Am I doing the same thing with Tim? It's almost as if he's the perfect man in my mind. Am I seeing something that isn't there with him, like I did with Larry? I pray I'm not, because I've never felt so strongly about someone, but I think I need to hear other perspectives. Kathy was shaking her head. Alan says he's a great guy, and my impression is that he's crazy about you. Amelia reached across the table and put her hand on her youngest daughter's. Honey, I don't know Tim well at all, but I see things in him I never saw in Larry. We hoped Larry would grow into his role as husband and someday as dad, but he didn't change and grow up. If anything, he seemed to be intent on controlling you, not forging a bond to withstand the rigors of marriage and family. We worried about that. We worried about you, and we worried about Larry. I certainly do not see those problems with Tim, but Joe knows him better. Joe? Don't ever compare your ex-husband and Tim, Jeannie. They are nothing alike. As your mother said, Larry was a charlatan. He appeared to be a man of substance, but he proved to without values, character, or courage. Tim is all three in spades. Maybe too much of each, if anything. I saw you two together, and there is no question there is a spark. No make that a lightning bolt between you. He paused to smile and chuckle at his blushing daughter, who was seemingly recollecting that spark. Still, I'll caution you again, as I did down there, go slow. He chuckled again. Or at least as slowly as you can. When you get together, you two produce a whirlwind that sweeps you and everyone around you, up and away. I should have stuck to my guns and kept you apart, but it's hard to deny what you see and feel when under your combined influence. Oh, well, that's all in the past. Now we have to pray that Tim and his troops are successful and go on from there. Frankly, I'm not sure what the future holds for you, much less for Tim, who was in the center of a maelstrom he did nothing to create. I know you love one another, but love isn't always enough. And with that, I realize we are discussing things over which we have no control. How would you feel about going to the chapel to pray for dispensation and for good to triumph over evil tonight? Father Jose saw them in the chapel, noted their collective demeanor, and went into the confessional. He turned on the light, signaling someone was inside, even though it was the wrong day and time, and waited. Amelia was first, then Kathy. Their confessions were somewhat concerning, but nothing out of the ordinary for a priest in San Antonio. Those of Joe, and then the sweet and innocent Jeannie, whom he had watched grow up and whom he had married in this very church, were, however, on a level he had not encountered since he served in Rwanda in the early 1970s. There was no single act of penance he could prescribe to cleanse them, so he ordered prayer, prayer, and more prayer. Prayer without ceasing. After they left, he prayed for them, repeatedly. He knew he should have ordered them to resolve to never repeat such acts. But, had they not acted, good men would be dead and Jeannie enslaved. He had seen firsthand what happened when evil men triumphed over good, and, regardless of current church teachings, he could not hold the good at fault for fighting against the darkness. Years before, Amelia had talked Joe into building a screened-in chapel and dining room, out along the north fence by his barbecue pit and outdoor kitchen. Crosses and crucifixes of various kinds adorned the back wall of the chapel, and a statue of Mary looked down from a platform high on the wall. As nightfall drew near, Joe asked how they would feel about him grilling steaks and vegetables and eating in the chapel. They thought that was a great idea, and it became even better when he brought his boombox out and played upbeat gospel and praise music on the cassette player. They kept a pleasant family conversation going, designed to keep Jeannie's mind off the rescue mission, and she responded well enough. But the tension was obvious, in her and in her father. She ate less than anyone, but did pick at her food and continue to converse with them. After the meal, Kathy began putting the paper plates and plastic utensils in the trash, while Joe cleaned up the grill. Amelia opened the storage door under the tiled serving shelf, which also served as an altar, and got out 4 kneeling pads. After setting them on the shelf, she took a jeweled box from the cabinet, turned back to her daughters, handed each a rosary, and suggested, perhaps this would be a good time to recite the rosary, say 3 Hail Marys, and ask Mother Mary to intercede on our behalf. Rather than answer, Jeannie took the beads, laid a pad in front of the altar, looked up at the statue of Mary, and knelt in prayer. The others quickly joined her. With the music playing quietly in the background, they recited the rosary, and then recited Hail Mary 3 times. Jeannie remained, eyes shut, avidly praying silently for the welfare of those being rescued and the rescuers, until Amelia urged her to sit with them around the table, hold hands, and continue praying. They remained in the chapel until the phone on the back porch rang. Sometime after 3 a.m., Joe hurried to the porch and answered the phone. The others scurried back and stood behind him. "That's not a problem, Ranger. I was having trouble sleeping tonight anyway." He was silent, listening for several minutes, and then laughed a mirthless laugh. "I appreciate the report, Jim, even if you are as drunk as a skunk. You know I'd have preferred to be there with you guys, fishing all night, but my business called. Glad to know you had a good night. Caught a couple of really good ones on the trot lines, and no one got so drunk they fell overboard. Maybe we can get together for a fish fry someday soon, after things calm down. Now, all of you need to put the beer away and get some rest. You never know what tomorrow will bring. Hasta luego." He turned back to his daughter with a big smile and announced, "If I understood the code, and I'm pretty sure I do, they rescued the kids, they are safe, and no one on the team was injured." Jeannie slumped in relief, but Kathy caught and hugged her. Joe continued. Jim was slurring his words. He said they were all drunk, and he suggested I stay up and watch the early news like they were going to do, because there were rumblings about something big happening out on Lake Travis. I assumed that malarkey was in case someone was listening in, but I think we do need to put some coffee on and watch the morning shows that begin at 4:30. The coffee tasted good and smelled better, but there was nothing on the 4:30 segment. Just after the 5 o'clock segment began, they had a breaking news interruption. In the morning, anchor described a terrible explosion and fire at a home on Lake Travis. He said the building was leveled and the inferno still roared. A gas leak that filled up the basement before igniting was suspected because the explosion was so devastating and the fire so intense. No mention was made of survivors or the dead, so they waited for more news. Jeannie got a phone call at 8:30 from the DPS. After apologies for calling early and for the bad news he had to deliver, the official said it had been determined, through identification of prints from a severed finger, that her husband was dead. She asked how they knew he was dead rather than injured, and he explained that forensics showed the person was already dead when the finger was removed. He told her that no other remains had been found, but a search was being conducted where the finger was found, near Pleasanton. She knew the actual remains were 75 miles away to the southwest under a mountain of red sand, and the body would likely never be found. That made her heart flutter with sadness. After getting another cup of coffee, she screwed up her courage and called his parents in Chicago. They were distraught at the loss of their son, and his mother made it clear they blamed Jeannie because she had abandoned him. She took a deep breath, expressed her sorrow, and talked about some of the good times they had shared with his parents as recently as last Christmas. After they discussed having a memorial service as soon as the body was recovered, the conversation became stilted, and his mother started crying again. She wished them well, said they would talk again after more was known, and hung up. She thought, they blame me because I left him? If only they knew. And then began crying again. Some of the tears were because her husband was dead, but more were because she was the one who killed him and brought so much grief to his parents. Exhausted, Jeannie fell asleep on the couch. Her mom covered her up, and she and Kathy went upstairs to nap. Joe went to his dealership to check on things, but returned a couple of hours later and joined the sleepers. Around 12:30, the phone rang. Amelia picked it up and then went into Kathy's room, woke her, and gave her the phone. She talked for 10 minutes or so before going to the living room and waking her sister. Jeannie, Alan called. He said Tim's son and wife were found in the brush near the site of the fire. They were with 2 high school students, and all are safe. Kim and the girls went through hell though, Jeannie. It was bad. They are being treated now. Jeannie cried tears of joy for Tim and his sons, and then tears of sorrow for what Karen endured. Whatever she had done, she did not deserve to that. Tim called a few hours later, using his distant, formal voice. He expressed his sadness at Larry's death and offered his condolences. She donned her formal voice and responded in kind, expressing her concerns for what his sons and wife endured, but thankful everyone was safe. She offered her assistance. He thanked her but declined, and then offered his assistance to her. She politely declined as well. She knew they couldn't be together in these circumstances, but she had never needed anyone more than she needed Tim right now, and she cried about that. The Hildebrands ate a very late lunch or early supper together, canned chicken noodle soup and crackers, and then went to bed after the evening news, which added little of substance to the earlier story. Amelia woke her daughters at 7 and insisted they come eat breakfast tacos before they got cold. Joe had eaten earlier and gone on to the dealership, and before he left, he had said there was nothing new about the house fire on the morning news. The 3 women ate and drank coffee, and carried on a pleasant conversation that avoided all the trauma, drama, death, and disasters of the recent past. At 10:30, they decided to go buy groceries, and maybe stop by North Star Mall for some leisurely shopping. After discussion, they decided to dress up a bit, hoping that would improve their attitudes, and each wore a sundress with comfortable heels. Amelia called the dealership and left a message for Joe telling him where they were going. Mom and Sis were heading out the door into the garage when Jeannie remembered Daddy's warning. Mom, Kathy, did you bring your pistols? I'm going back to get mine. Do I need to bring yours too? She did. Although they and Joe had been regulars at the nearby gun range for years, carrying guns was not a part of their daily routine yet. North Star Mall came first, since their grocery list included food that had to be refrigerated, and they enjoyed shopping and buying clothing more than groceries. They had a bag from Foley's and another from Frost Brothers when they stopped for a bite at the food court, and added another bag each at their next stop, Josk's. Happy and heavily laden, they left Josk's and walked toward Amelia's car, which was close to the new Giant Justin's boot sculpture on the north parking lot. What made her do it she never understood, but for some reason Jeannie began watching a white service company van that was moving slowly along, keeping pace with them 3 rows over. She watched for a few more steps, and then called out to her mom and sister, feigning the need to stop and rearrange her bags. They were laughing at her, until they saw the look on her face. Jeannie positioned herself with her back to the van, and motioned with her thumb for them to look behind her. Don't stare, but pretend you're looking at me and look over my shoulder. See the white van? It has been moving slowly to intercept us near the car. I don't know whether we are actually in danger, but to be safe, let's go back inside the mall and call Dad. If they turn around or back up when we start back to the mall, drop your bags and run. She laughed loudly, pointed toward the mall, and started walking that way, with her mother and sister following. As soon as they reversed course, the van backed up, turned around, and sped up to cut them off from the relative safety of the mall. They dropped their bags and started running, but it was soon clear they were too far away to beat the van. Jeannie directed them behind a big 4x4 double cab pickup and drew her pistol from her purse. Mom and sis followed suit. They crouched behind the pickup, with Kathy watching the van over the hood. It stopped, and 3 men jumped out. They're running toward us, dodging between cars, and they are carrying something in their hands. Jeannie took charge. Mom, go to the front. You take the one on the right. Kathy, you can see over the hood. Take the one in the middle. I'm going behind the truck. I'll take the one on the left. Wait until they emerge from the next row to shoot. The only concern the men showed was that their prey might escape. They were running pell-mell toward the women. Each had a pistol, but the pistols were pumping up and down as they ran, not being pointed toward the women. The one on the right emerged first, and Amelia fired. A heartbeat later, Kathy fired. The gunman on the left stopped and snapped a shot at the pickup, breaking glass but not hitting anyone. Jeannie shot him in the chest, and when he didn't go down, shot him again. The van had continued down the road toward the mall, then turned north onto the road they were on. When they saw the women were firing, the van accelerated toward them. Jeannie moved to the back corner where she could get a shot at the driver. Amelia and Kathy took positons facing the van and prepared to shoot. Jeannie saw that the man her mom shot was trying to reach his gun, which was laying in front of him a few steps. She fired at him, striking him in the shoulder, and yelled that if he moved again, she would kill him. A rifle emerged from the passenger window of the van, and the man leaned out the window to get a shot. Shoot the driver, Jeannie yelled, and she fired twice at the passenger with the rifle. She heard 4 more shots, and the van veered off and ran into the rear corner of a Lincoln that stretched further into the lane. It was quiet for a minute, and then a man jumped from the sliding door with an automatic rifle and sprayed their pickup. When he stopped firing and started running, Jeannie steadied herself and fired twice, hitting him in the lower back and dropping him like someone shot in a movie. He sprawled out on the pavement, screaming in pain. Mall security and a SAPD patrol car arrived within a minute. The women remained crouched behind the truck, taking no chances in case there were more gunmen, or one of those they shot was playing possum. The police ordered everyone to come out with their hands in the air, but Amelia yelled, "We're not coming out until you check the van and the wounded men over here by us. They shot at us and tried to kidnap us, and we don't know if it's safe yet." A second and third police cruiser arrived, surrounding the crime scene. No one forced them to come out, but a sergeant with a bullhorn warned them that they needed to lay their guns down before the officers would begin their examination of the van and those lying on the pavement. They laid their pistols on the pavement and raised their hands, but stayed behind the truck. 2 officers immediately approached the van. One examined the man lying in the lane moaning in pain, and 2 more checked the men closest to the women. They then turned their attention to Jeannie, Kathy, and Amelia, insisting they come out from behind the truck. They did, with hands raised. They were held at the police station for over 3 hours, while the police sorted through the flood of information coming in from law enforcement and from the survivors. Joe and his lawyer were there within 15 minutes of being called, but little was asked of the women during the first 2 hours. Things suddenly changed after the police identified the men as members of a local gang. They read them the laundry list of crimes they had committed today and the sentences they faced for the attempted kidnappings and other crimes. In response to an offer to speak with the DA about reducing their charges if they cooperated, the gang leader, Darius, confessed they were contacted by a man who offered them $20,000 each for Amelia, Kathy, and Jeannie. He didn't know that man's name, but they were given a phone number to call when they had the women. That's when the FBI was called in. The Phoebes, informed by law enforcement documentation of potentially connected events, first questioned Jeannie about the attempted break-in at the Houseman's, about the charges of abuse she filed against Larry, and about his recent demise. She stuck to her story, her family backed her up, and, after Joe threatened to have Jeannie stop cooperating and get his lawyer involved, the feds decided the more rewarding strategy was to catch whoever hired the 5 gangsters. San Antonio police and the FBI concocted a plan. They had Darius call the number and say they had captured all 3 women. What were they to do with them? They were told to bring them to a warehouse on the southwest side, off US 90, near Kelly Air Force Base. On the off chance that a demand for ransom would be forthcoming, 2 agents accompanied Joe back to his business to set up a recorder for incoming calls. No one, including Jeannie or her family, believed the attempted kidnapping was for ransom. Everyone believed it was somehow tied to the previous threats made by her husband and the bounty for her capture, but it was worth taking the chance. Joe and the agents had stopped in the dealership service waiting room for coffee and some pan dulce from the local panaderia before entering Joe's office and setting up the recorder. They were relaxing, enjoying the sweet bread and coffee, when the receptionist transferred a call to Joe. "Joe Hildebrand, how may I help you?" A somewhat muffled voice replied, "We have your women, Joe Hildebrand. We intended to fly them to another country, and then auction them off to the highest bidders. Though older, your wife will fetch a good price. But those daughters of yours, no telling how much we can get for them. What do you mean you have them? I talked to them a few hours ago, and they were shopping at the mall. You're full of shit, Joe challenged. But you haven't heard from them since, and you won't, unless you agree to our demands. I still think you're full of shit, but what demands are you making? First, you bring us $100,000 per woman. When you deliver the money, you tell us where Tim Kelly is. We have men all over the state, and when you tell us his whereabouts, we'll verify it, and then turn you and the women loose. Of course, if you involve the cops in any way, we'll kill you and sell the women. Do you understand? Oh, I understand, but I need to verify you have my family. Let me talk to one of them. They're bound up in another room. I'll show them to you when you get here in an hour. If you aren't here by then, throw them a goodbye kiss. Do you think I have $300,000 lying around in my office? I'll need a couple of hours just to put the money together. You have 1 hour to get the money together. I'll call back then. If not, bye-bye babies. The agents checked with the phone company and then immediately called their superiors. SAPD had already secured another service van from the company from which the first had been stolen, and the SWAT team was ready to roll. The plan was for them to drive straight to the warehouse, wait for the doors to be opened, and drive right in. An armor-plated truck would be standing by just out of sight and would respond if the situation inside the warehouse warranted. There was only one problem with the plan, but it was a doozy. The ransom call came from the local office of a state senator. Joe and the two agents remained in his office. The SWAT team started toward the warehouse at the 40-minute mark, intending to enter only after the second ransom call was made. Another squad was dispatched to the senator's office, standing by to see if the second call came from there as well. It did, in exactly 60 minutes. The SWAT team was in the building within 2 minutes of the call being received, and they captured 5 more members of the local gang without a shot being fired. The senator and 3 other men were in his office when the police burst in with riot guns and pistols at the ready. He was still on the phone with Joe, setting up the drop, when his world of arrogance and privilege ended. Joe and Jim Boyd made the strategic decision not to tell Tim about the attempted kidnapping, knowing that he would take it personally and wade in. Tim did learn about the attempt through TV and newspapers, but not until they had it wrapped up with a bow on it, so they were able to persuade him it was over and done. He made it known he wasn't pleased about not being notified, but accepted the outcome. Over the next few days, the Hildebrands watched much of the state government implode on TV, and then wealthy businessmen, preachers, and even some women go up in flames over the next few days as expose after expose hit the evening news. They had no doubt as to the source, but no calls of congratulations were made. This was not the time to come out of the shadows. They did attend Karen's fake funeral. It was held in her hometown, and they sat toward the back with Jim Boyd and his wife, the Housemans, Alan, Chet, Jennifer, and Randy Jackson, and dozens of Karen and Tim's other friends and colleagues. Tim's eulogy and closing remarks brought all of them to tears. They gathered outside before going to the graveside service, where Alan called them together, quietly bemoaned Karen's mistakes and early death, and asked them to join him in silent prayer for her soul. Jeannie prayed for her fervently and vowed to take the best possible care of her babies, if given the chance. After the brief graveside service, the Reverend invited everyone to the American Legion Hall for a commemoration of Karen's life and service to school children. There were mementos and photos of her personal and professional life all around the room, and a beautifully framed 11 by 15 photo of her with her sons and husband stood at the center of the table where food and drinks waited. They were all smiling brightly in the photo, which only seemed to make the circumstances leading to her death more tragic. The little boys had remained stoic throughout the afternoon, and remained so while standing in the receiving line with both sets of grandparents and their daddy. The facade cracked when Laura and Will hugged them, and broke completely when Patty and Jeannie knelt in front of them and held their arms out. They jumped into their arms, hugged them tightly, and sobbed inconsolably on their shoulders. That brought the line to a halt, and Tim suggested loudly that the Reverend say a prayer, and everyone go ahead and get a plate. They would try to see them all before they left. He turned his back and sobbed a few times himself before gaining control and wiping his eyes with his coat sleeve. He turned back in time to see the women rise with the boys tightly held in their arms and speak to the grandparents. Chet wrapped an arm around his shoulders on one side, and Will Bear hugged him from the other side. "God damn it all to hell, Tim," Will said, his voice thick with emotion. "And God damn them all to hell too," Jim Boyd added quietly as he stood in front of Tim. "I can hear their sorry but sizzling and their pitiful cries, yet I wish I could somehow make it worse for the whole damn bunch. I do swear to you, buddy, that I will make it worse for the ones still alive. I'd like to resurrect them, just so I could kill them again, but slower and more painfully this time," Tim hissed. He hugged the ranger, Chet, and Will hugged him, and then they all stepped apart, slightly embarrassed by their display of emotion. The focus of the crowd, however, was on Patty holding Mark and Jeannie holding Patrick on their hips as they picked the food for their plates. Tim knew he would have some explaining to do to Karen's parents, but the story was innocent enough that he wasn't concerned. Nonetheless, he didn't want them thinking poorly of Jeannie and Patty, so he would find a way to enlighten them. Tim joined his sons at the table and picked at his food, but the emotions of the day had taken their toll on him and food was the last thing he wanted. Jim, the Housemans, Chet, Alan, and the Hildebrands were all very solicitous of Karen's parents and her other kinfolk. Tim's parents, Linda and Nate, and Jan and Gary also did their best to keep them occupied, so their minds could have a brief respite from the sorrow they had endured for weeks. It seemed to work, because, although they ate little, both smiled a few times during the meal. In his absence, the board had offered Tim the job of head football coach and director of athletics, but had allowed him a month of leave and time to decide whether to take it. A big chunk of him wanted simply to move on, but he finally decided to take the job, sell the house they had lived in, and buy another closer to the high school. There was no running from Karen's memory anyway, though he knew that she is safe and alive, and the only surviving member of the poker players, John Allen, had fled to another state after being sued for divorce by a very spiteful wife. It would take time to sell the house, but he couldn't force himself to live there surrounded by memories, so Tim rented a nice older house with a big yard. It was furnished, because the older couple that lived there had recently moved in with their daughter up in Dallas due to their declining health. Tim switched out the mattresses, but used the rest of their furniture. In some ways it upset the boys to not be at home, but it was a new adventure, so they quickly adapted. Even though both returned to work in late April, after everything that had happened, Jenny and Tim had agreed to confine their relationship to casual conversations in the workroom or halls of the school and department meetings. Her heart hurt for Tim and his boys, but they needed time to work through the trauma the family had endured, and she needed time and counseling to overcome the trauma of the battle at the ranch and Larry's demise at her hand. Knowing she would never live there again, she put their house on the market and moved into an apartment. When school ended in mid-May, Tim took the boys to visit their maternal grandparents for a week, and them to visit his parents for a week. Tim explained that the boys had gotten close to Patty and Jeannie when they were staying with the Housemans, just before he was ambushed. They knew that also, because the boys had told them. Gramps finally stopped him and said, "Look, Tim, you were a great husband to our little girl. You're a great father to our grandchildren, and you're a great son-in-law. We understand that you need to move on. All we ask is let us be in the lives of our grandchildren." He smiled and asked, "Children can never have too many grandparents, can they?" Tim agreed they could not, and swore he would always honor Karen to her boys and always include them in their lives. Tim had begun calling Jeannie every few days after school let out, and she returned to San Antonio, but theirs were friendly rather than romantic conversations. They were both damaged and afraid to take the next step. Larry's parents decided to hold his celebration of life in Chicago on the weekend of Memorial Day, but neither she nor her parents were invited. They held a remembrance of their own, focused entirely on the early days and the good times. She apologized again and prayed for Larry's soul. That was a miserable night, and she was back at her counselor on Tuesday to talk again about the existential conflict of loving someone who hurts and then tries to destroy you, and of defending yourself from that person. On the second Wednesday in June, Tim called and had the boys ask Jeannie if she would like to go to the coast with them for a week. She excitedly replied that she would like that very much, and asked when they would leave. They boys celebrated noisily before Tim came back on and asked if she would be willing to drive down to the ranch tomorrow, visit with his family and her new friends for a couple of days, and then go on down to Port Aransas. She arrived in time for lunch with Tim's family on Thursday, spent the afternoon with him and the boys, got a guided tour of his hometown, and met some more of his friends and relations. Friday, she spent the morning with Tim, Patrick, and Mark seeing more sights around the town and area, ate a delicious lunch with the family, and then they went swimming in the city pool that afternoon. As modest as her suit was, Jeannie still drew a lot of attention from the moms watching their kids swimming, almost as much attention as Tim received. The four adults played games with the kids that evening and put them in bed at 8. A very relaxed but fulfilling day. Saturday, they went to the museum in town, which featured exhibits about local pioneer families, including Tim's mom's family and his dad's family. Saturday night, she was treated to a relatively restrained evening with Los Ratones and their spouses in the shed at the ranch. It was a covered dish supper this time, and each woman delighted in placing just a little of her specialty on Jeannie's plate, insisting that she just had to taste it. with a stern but light-hearted warning that La Guerra was too small and too gringa for what they were feeding her. Teodora stepped in and saved her. That happened, however, only after she had eaten 10,000 calories or so and had gulped a gallon of iced tea trying to reduce the burning in her mouth and throat. She felt like she had swallowed a burning volleyball and dreaded tonight's heartburn and tomorrow's number twos. No alcoholic beverages were served because this wasn't a celebration. It was an opportunity to come together in appreciation of the unlikely facts that none of them had been injured and their goal had been accomplished. Sheriff Miguel stood, held his tea glass out, and offered thanks to all of them for standing together when necessary, and thanks that they were all here together tonight. He then yielded to Tim, who fervently expressed his gratitude and love for them all, before choking up and sitting down. It was silent for a moment, but Jeannie stepped up, thanked them for welcoming her and making her a part of their pandilla, and, with a laugh, thanked the women for teaching her the fabulous Mexican dances last time they were together and for the delicious dishes tonight. She lightened the mood, and soon the fiesta atmosphere returned. It was after midnight when they returned to Tim's parents' home. He kissed her gently on the lips, and they went to their respective rooms, as if the spark hadn't passed between them and reignited their feelings for each other. Nate and Linda joined them the next morning for breakfast, and then they rode out to the ranch together while the grandparents took care of the boys. There was a degree of foreboding, given the events when they were last here, but it was impossible to tell anything but ranching activities had happened. Nate didn't take they by the mass gravesite, but he told Tim that, if he had, no one would have had a clue. They stopped by the ranch house after checking on the cattle and horses. There were no signs of the events there either. Linda brought sandwiches, chips, and drinks, and they stayed for several hours just eating and visiting, letting the discomfort dissolve over time. By the time they left, laughter flowed easily as Nate reminisced about the night terrors and cougars screaming, and reminded her that even Joe was laughing at his daughter. Jeannie got in the spirit, and before they left, pointed at their bed, and smiled enticingly at Tim. The porpoise were frolicking when they rowed across the channel on the ferry, causing the boys to hop up and down in glee. As the landing drew near, they got back in the pickup and bubbled to Jeannie about the porpoise and eagles and going swimming in the ocean where you have to watch for jellyfish and sharks. Their rental was a house, one of 3 in a triangular cluster set in the dunes just off the beach. A small sandy road led up to the 3 houses, which were built on wooden piers considerably larger than the base of telephone poles. All 3 houses were a full story above the dunes and had a common parking area in the middle, with 1 slot under each house. Tim had rented the smaller, 2-bedroom house in front. The 2 larger houses were empty until Wednesday morning, when the Jeannie and Tim's parents and their siblings were arriving to spend the rest of the week. The larger bedroom had a king bed and bathroom. The smaller bedroom had a queen bed and an adjacent bathroom. Tim and the boys were going to be in the larger bedroom, Jeannie in the smaller. Or, that was the plan. They covered the boys in suntan lotion, made them wear beach hats, and set up a sunshade shelter to keep their food, drinks, toys, and chairs under. Then they hit the beach, started playing in the waves near the shore, and hunting in the sand for shells, and the precautions were forgotten. Fortunately, Jeannie remembered and forced a second round of suntan lotion and hat wearing before the castle building got underway. Tim was good at building moats and walls, but his technique with the finer points of castle building was lacking. Jeannie, on the other hand, could sculpt and trim like a beach bum, so Daddy became a mule bringing sand and water for the artists. A hamburger and shake from Custard's last stand, sitting on the deck watching the ships and planes and stars and the moon rising out of the water. Mark went asleep in Jeannie's lap, and Patrick followed on Dad's lap. When they went to put them in bed, Mark wouldn't turn Jeannie loose. "I want to sleep with Mommy," he complained sleepily. Tim shook his head, but grinned. Jeannie smiled, but with tears in her eyes. The line was getting blurry. Tuesday, they tried surf fishing, which consisted of Dad baiting lines and casting, and Jeannie helping them hold the rods. That was more trouble than it was worth, so they went over to the ship channel and fished off a wharf using bobbers. It didn't matter much what kind of trash fish bit. It was still a big adventure, with lots of whoops and hollers. With the stringer still empty, they stopped by the seafood market and bought fish and shrimp to cook at the house for supper, and hot dogs for lunch with a half-gallon of frozen custard for dessert. Their naps were longer than normal, giving Jeannie and Tim more time to talk, with a little flirting thrown in. The conservative one-piece bathing suits she had been wearing did nothing to hide her lush body anyway, but Tim was very impressed by the maillot she wore that afternoon, and it showed. She took every opportunity to pose and show off, which only made his problem greater. They played in the surf, then went shell and sand dollar hunting down the beach a good ways. The boys wanted to know why those men were whistling and yelling when they went by a group of college-age boys, but Dad explained they were just having fun. 100 yards down the beach, he had fallen behind a dozen yards. He gave a loud wolf whistle and exclaimed, "Yeah, baby," like the boys had. Jeannie smirked. Patrick and Mark gave him a puzzled look, and he pointed at a nearly pristine sand dollar he had found. They scurried over to add it to their bucket, and he winked at the real reason. She winked back and wiggled her hips. Walking back, the boys were on either side of Jeannie holding her hands, and Tim was carrying their bucket of bounty, some driftwood, and the omnipresent beach bag he took everywhere they went. Two older couples near the water stopped them, and one of the women said, "We saw you walk by a while ago, and we wanted you to know that you were just a beautiful family." Tim thanked them, but Jeannie had something in her eye and didn't say much. The boys beamed at being called beautiful. After the seafood bounty featuring stuffed flounder and boiled shrimp, they again watched the sun set, the lights on the oil rigs and ships come on, and the stars come out. The moon was already up a little ways, so it was silver rather than orange when darkness came. They all cuddled up on the rocking love seat, and the boys went asleep at the same time. When they tried to put them in the king-size bed, however, both wanted Jeannie to sleep with them, so Tim brought her nightgown, took his sleeping shorts, and they changed bedrooms. Jeannie lay between the two boys, held them against her, and cried very quietly for a few minutes. Tim went to bed amazed at how quickly his guys had taken to his, what, girlfriend? It was getting close to time to make that call. The Kellys arrived in 2 vehicles at 10, the Hildebrands, plus Alan, at 10:30. He and Kathy were riding close together in the back seat, and it was clear to see that relationship was developing nicely. As soon as everyone had their beach gear on, Tim asked Nate, Linda, Jan, and Gary to take Jeannie and the boys down to the beach, set everything up, and he and the parents would be down in a few minutes. They looked puzzled, but readily agreed. "I asked you to stay because I need some advice. The relationship between Jeannie and the boys has grown a lot faster than I envisioned. In fact, Mark called her mommy Monday night, and both boys slept with her last night. I know, that's not a bad thing, but I don't want Karen's parents to be blindsided by this. How bad an idea would it be to invite them down and have them stay in your 3rd bedroom, Joe and Amelia? I think if they saw for themselves that there is a natural affinity, maybe anyway, what do you guys think?" There was a bit of back and forth as they discussed it among themselves and then with Tim, but they ultimately agreed. Tim's mother decided she and Amelia should be the ones to invite them, so they did, and they quickly accepted. Jeannie was surprised when Tim told her, and she was nervous when they arrived later that afternoon. Karen's mom made it a little worse when they first arrived, but after a few hours her jealousy and resentment were gone, displaced by love for her grandsons and acceptance that they liked and relied on Jeannie a lot. Meals taken together, beach time, souvenir shopping, posing for pictures, walks, and the nightly rigged ship stargazing brought everyone closer. The boys prospered in the bath of love and affection. The 3 younger couples went out to a club Saturday night, drank some beer, and danced. Nate, Gary, and Tim had to beat the college boys and professional Lotharios off with a stick, but they managed, and the egos of the girls were about as inflated as their excitement by the appreciation the strangers showed. Nate and Gary were in a hurry to get back to the houses because they were going to get lucky tonight. Tim plotted and planned all the way back, and when they got there he grabbed a couple of towels, his pickup keys, and Jeannie, and drove south down the beach toward the least populated area he knew of. Jeannie scooted right next to him and asked, "Where are we going?" "Somewhere private," he answered. "We have the whole house to ourselves. The boys are staying with their grandparents tonight, remember?" she inquired. "Yes, honey, but with what I have planned for you, I'm afraid they would all be awake before long," he explained sincerely. "What? I don't know. Really, huh? You think a lot of yourself, don't you?" "I'm not like that." They started around 1. By 2, the mattresses were deflated and the lone house anywhere near, which had been dark when they arrived, had all the lights on. She blamed him. What he did was just too much to bear silently. They were dressed, sitting in the pickup, watching the waves breaking in the moonlight by the time the deputy cruised up and asked with a smirk if they had heard any strange noises. They had not. He blithely suggested they might feel safer about a mile down, where there were no houses and no one to report strange noises. They thanked him. He turned north. They continued a mile further south and went for a swim in the misty moonlight. Campers 2 miles south were certain they heard a puma around 3, but they just zipped up their tent and tried to go back to sleep. From Tim's perspective, their previous tryst had been earth-shaking, but tonight's probably started a tsunami that would strike Cuba and Florida around noon tomorrow. He decided that, if they ever did get married, he would invest in the best soundproofing available for the interior and exterior walls of their house, so their kids could sleep at night. Their group included a couple of denominations of Protestants as well as Catholics, but they all attended the early service at Trinity by the Sea Episcopal Church and came away refreshed and revitalized. After breakfast at a cafe, they finished packing and said their goodbyes. Karen's parents thanked them all for being included, and then Granny whispered, "She's a lovely girl, Tim. I can see that she loves the boys and they love her. I know Karen would not want you trying to raise them by yourself. We hope it works out for the two of you. Anyway, we love you and we love the boys, and we know you will keep us a part of their lives as they grow up. She left us two amazing grandsons to love and a wonderful son-in-law to love too." Tim kissed and hugged them both, as did the boys, and then they drove away. "What did she have to say, son?" asked his mom. "She said Jeannie is a lovely girl who loves her grandchildren and they love her, and they hope it works out for us," Tim answered with shiny eyes. Jeannie crooked her head and asked, "Really? I mean, they were nice, but I thought they would, I don't know, be resentful?" "Daughter, as long as you take good care of Patrick and Mark, they will accept and support you. Well, and Tim, I can tell they love their three boys a lot," Amelia explained with a smile. Jeannie put on her pouty mouth, crooked her head the other way, and asked, "Tim too? I mean, these precious boys, that's easy. Their daddy, on the other hand, can be pretty trying." Nate, aware of the boys standing beside his parents, nonchalantly asked, "So, Jeannie, how was the moonlight ride? You didn't hear any jungle sounds or screaming cougars, did you? I only asked because I thought I heard something once, and then a cop went down the beach in a hurry, so I wondered." As he knew she would, she blushed scarlet, which caused the other adults to laugh, Tim to go hug her, and Patrick to ask wide-eyed, "Are there really cougars out at night at the beach?" "There must be," Nate answered seriously, "because I'm pretty sure I heard one. It sounded just like the one we heard at the ranch. Might even be the same one." "Who would win between a cougar and a shark?" Patrick asked excitedly. "If they are both in the water, the shark," Nate replied. "But if they are on land, I'll bet on the cougar. Especially this cougar." "Daddy, is a cougar like a big, pretty kitty cat?" Mark asked. "I think our teacher showed us a picture of one. If it's a big kitty." Nate interjected, "Yes, Mark, this one is definitely a pretty, kind of big, kitty cat. I don't know how dangerous it is, but it can purr and scream pretty loudly, so maybe it is dangerous." "Enough," Linda announced, trying to stop her husband and save her friend from the ongoing laughter. Of course, she was laughing just as hard as the others, and Jeannie, whose face was turned to Tim's chest, was smiling and giggling quietly. "Well, now that my precious kitten has been outed and properly harassed in front of everyone, I suppose we should get on the road too," Joe declared. "When are you coming home, kitten?" "Maybe never, Daddy. You and Mom and my sister and Alan were enjoying Nate's juvenile humor entirely too much," Jeannie stated with a faux frown and scrunchy face. "Kitten, before you pout, you need to remember that I was at the ranch too." Everyone roared, and Tim hugged Jeannie's head to his chest protectively, holding his hand over her ear. She grinned like the Cheshire Cat, remembering what it was that made her yowl and purr last night, and at the ranch. Nate took her away from Tim, wrapped his arms around her, picked her up, spun her around, and said, "It's only 'cause I love you, sis." They all hugged one another, said it was so much fun they had to do it again before football season, and left Jeannie, Tim, and the boys waving goodbye on top of the dune. "Is there any chance we could stay just one more day?" Jeannie asked plaintively. "Already taken care of," Tim replied. One more day and night at Port Aransas, 3 more days at the ranch, and Jeannie returned to her parents' home in San Antonio. Tim and his sons drove to Austin and their rented house, but he was ready to start looking for something permanent. Tim was up early the next morning, ready to make things happen in their personal life so he could feel secure before he had to put more focus on the upcoming football season. He took the boys to the Happy Lions Learning Center, which was the daycare center where they stayed last year and would stay this year during the school day. Miss Beverly was as glad to see them as they were to see her and their friends. After watching the excited hellos and hugs, Tim got serious about finding a permanent home. Rather than looking for another realtor or talking to the one he had hired for his house, he inquired around. After all, he knew a lot of locals, and they knew everything that was going on in the area. Deciding to start at the administration building, which was full of gossips and know-alls anyway, he first looked in on the superintendent, where he got a very nice welcome. After their visit, he stopped outside and asked his secretary if she knew of a nice, affordable place for sale closer to the school. She told him he should call a builder she knew who was buying and fixing up old properties. It was Daryl Cunningham, whom he also knew, so he looked up his business in the phone book and called. Daryl happened to be in the office. He told Tim he had just the place and invited him to come take a look. Since they were both free, they agreed to meet in 30 minutes. After they shook hands and had the obligatory Texas greeting, Daryl explained that the house and land he was gonna show him previously belonged to an older couple with failing health. They sold it to him for a nice profit over what they paid and moved to Dallas, where their daughter lived. Daryl admitted that the nice profit they made resulted in him getting a great deal in today's market, and he almost felt guilty about buying it. But they and their kids were happy, so he was too. He had begun fixing everything up, starting with pulling the worn carpeting and refinishing the wooden floors downstairs and the stairs to the second floor. There was a lot left to do. Improve the electrical and plumbing, repaint the interior, and re-roof. The exterior native rock walls were in great shape, and it was remarkably well insulated for the era, with the rock fascia over concrete block, covered with thick paneling in the living and dining rooms, and gypsum board in the other rooms. The trees, shrubs, and lawn were also in good shape, trimmed and well watered. Tim explained that he couldn't buy any house until his house sold, but Daryl offered to provide interim financing for up to 6 months. Making 2 mortgage payments would be a struggle, so Tim called the realtor with whom he had listed his house. She excitedly told him she had been trying to call him because she had someone interested and asked if he could meet her at the house. When the realtor showed up, there was a young couple with her. She introduced Tim to her niece and her niece's husband and asked if she could show them around. He agreed, but warned that nothing had been cleaned or straightened in over a month. They didn't care. They loved the house and made a full-price offer on the spot. Having already signed the necessary documents when he hired the realtor, he took their offer and they all signed more documents. They wanted to move in 3 weeks from Monday, which meant he had to get on the stick. He called Daryl and told him he was ready to meet and hear the offer. Daryl and his son, Dale, who played football and threw the shot and discus, were on the roof checking the worn and faded cedar shingles when he drove up. They climbed down, shook hands. Dale and Tim talked about the upcoming season, and then Daryl asked, "Sure, I can't sell this place to you right now, Coach? I'll give it to you for what I paid plus 10% and the cost of the repairs I've already done. Believe me, that's a great deal for a house this well built on 11 tree-shaded acres. Heck, someday the other 10 acres will be worth at least $1 million, and that day ain't that far away." "Well, Daryl, I hope you don't want me to pay $1 million. I'll be about $750,000 short." Daryl laughed and explained, "Coach, I'll take the $250,000 you say you've got, if you'll let me contract the rest of the repairs and renovations. To tell the truth, I'm a little overextended financially right now, and I've got a much bigger deal on the table. With your money I can make that happen, and, heck, I might become a millionaire before you do." They spent the next 90 minutes going over the house with a fine-tooth comb, with Dale making a list of things that needed doing or Tim wanted done. When that was over, Daryl gave Tim a ballpark estimate he could afford, and they shook on it. Daryl said his crews were tied up today and tomorrow, but he would send a plumber and electrician to get those issues out of the way. Since no realtor was involved, they agreed on a standard sales contract and the use of a lawyer they knew who had his own title company. The survey was fresh, so the title company should be satisfied. If not, they would use the same surveyor at minimal cost. Daryl and Dale left, and Tim walked around outside to determine what he would need to take care of the acre of lawn, shrubs, and trees. He wanted to look around the whole 11 acres, but decided he needed to be wearing his boots and jeans when he did. So he got in this truck, drove to the little grocery store about a mile away, and bought a 6-pack of Lone Star. When he woke up this morning, he owned one house. 8 hours later, it was sold, and he had bought another house on 11 acres. He wanted to share that with someone, and that someone was Jeannie. He went back to his old home, popped the cap on the first long neck, and, ignoring the irony, called her. He sipped a beer, and they talked for over an hour. Long distance? He would pay Ma Belle through the nose for that, but he didn't care. Her voice invigorated him. The boys were ready to leave when he got there. It was still early, so he took them to see their new house. The idea that they had a new house got them overexcited, and they ran the mouths, mostly at the same time, all the way over. They loved the big yard and all the trees, but Mark wanted to know why things were torn up in the house and they didn't have any furniture. Daddy explained that their furniture was coming later, after they got some work done on the house, so they were staying in a motel until it was ready. They liked the motel because it had a nice swimming pool. Tim took his guys to daycare at 8 the next day, and then spent the morning coordinating the transfer of his utility and phone accounts to the new house, getting the address changed for mail, and removing Karen from all the bank accounts. Danny made decisions that would pay off rather well in the future, buying $1,000 for each boy of Chansey Tech stocks, Apple and Microsoft, and another $1,000 on nickel per share stocks for a retail chain called Walmart. He also bought a few blue chip stocks, but invested the rest in real estate around the southern side of Lake Travis. Tim so appreciated his friend's rationale for each purchase that he took $15,000 from his land and cattle account and gave it to Danny, telling him to gamble away. He usually used cattle proceeds to buy more cattle, but 25 years later the decision to invest that money improved his teacher retirement check by several digits. He was outside talking with the plumbers and electricians when Jeannie drove up in the new 1980 Jeep Grand Wagoneer her daddy gave her. It was eye-catching by itself. White with wood paneling, had a 360 engine that growled, and four-wheel drive. But that wasn't why work stopped. That happened when the blonde driver stepped out wearing sandals, white short, and a red and white checked, off-the-shoulder blouse. She was still nicely tanned, and the visual effect of her approach caused excitement unanimously. Seeing the fan club, she sashayed up, gave Tim a kiss on the cheek, said hello to the workmen, and asked for the grand tour. She was highly impressed by the workmanship of the woodwork, the banisters, the fireplace and mantel, by the square footage of the oversized living and dining area, and by the spacious bedrooms and closets. She wasn't impressed with the layout of the kitchen, the built-in appliances, or the 3 bathrooms, but she absolutely loved the yard and the 10-acre woods surrounding the house. After her input, Tim called Daryl's office and asked them to send him by when he got a chance. He came right after lunch, and Tim said, "Let's do another walkthrough, this time with my interior designer." Daryl winked and said, "Let's go, Miss Jeannie," big-eyed. She called Tim aside. "I didn't mean to cause all this new work, Tim. You asked for my opinion, and I gave it to you. But if these things are all right with you, you should leave them alone. This isn't my house." Tim smiled, took her arm, and took her back to Daryl, but she thought she heard him quietly say, "Not yet," before he sent them off. Her heart fluttered. The cost of the changes Jeannie thought important were partly offset by Tim's decision to install a metal roof rather than replace the cedar shakes. Daryl just happened to have a roofing crew needing work and a surplus of the color that offset the native rock walls of the house, so they cut a deal that was good for both. The metal roof would be safer and less affected by storms, yet be attractive, and it cost a lot less to install and maintain. The plumber and electrician were about through with the original improvements, but they were rerouted to the new projects in the bathrooms and kitchen. They measured everything and handed him a sheet covered with drawings and numbers. "Let's go shopping for appliances," Tim suggested with a smile. Jeannie looked at him thoughtfully, and again told him those were just her suggestions, based on her personal taste, so he shouldn't spend money on replacing something he liked. He just smiled and said, "Let's go. I need to pick the boys up at 5, and the appliance store Daryl recommends is closer to Austin." Tim was really glad he brought her. He had no idea what colors or styles to pick, so he pushed her forward to inform and negotiate with the saleswoman. "Okay, but don't say I didn't warn you," she told him with a frown. She said that as if she thought he cared about the color and style of appliances that went into the kitchen, which he didn't. She had much better taste than he did. Anyway, the boys were thrilled to see Jeannie and had to catch her up on everything that had happened since they saw her last. Frustrated by Patrick's domination of the conversation, Mark took her face in his hands, turned her to him, and started telling her what he had been doing. Tim laughed, but Jeannie handled the competition like an experienced mom, and both boys got their turns. She grabbed her little travel case before they left her Jeep in the garage at the new house and took her to the motel with them. She didn't know what they had planned, but wanted to be ready for anything. After a nice swim, they ate supper across the street at a small family-style restaurant, and then returned to the room to get ready for bed. She read Winnie the Pooh to them, turning the 100-acre woods into the 10-acre woods, just like your new house has. She tucked them in bed, gave each a kiss, and prepared to drive home. Tim would not allow that so late, so she called her mom and spent the night, with Mark in her bed and Patrick in Daddy's. She did get a very nice goodnight kiss from Tim, which made going to sleep in the same room with him that much harder. They took the boys to daycare at 9, after breakfast and playtime at McDonald's, and went shopping for bathroom fixtures. Jeannie thought he should install custom tile showers and granite countertops, so they picked out toilets, sinks, bathtubs, and faucets for the sinks, bathtubs, and showers. Tim detoured by the closest Sears. He had a push mower, weed eater, and other lawn tools, but keeping the acre of yard and the sides of the road mowed would require a riding mower. He bought a Craftsman 42-inch, along with ramps to carry it in the back of his pickup. Jeannie had no say in that decision, but she didn't care any more than he did about the kitchen appliances. She had moved from riding in the passenger seat into the middle over the 2 days, and he kept his hand on her bare leg when he could. She was feeling positively domestic and as happy as can be under the circumstances. It was still too early to be open with their relationship, lest they cause a scandal, but in her mind, they were already a couple planning their future together. Time flew by. She moved into her new apartment with help from Tim and his sons. Coaching school started, and the boys went to stay with Karen's parents for the 5 days. The staff was set, filled with people Tim knew and trusted. He kept the best of the old staff and added 2 exceptional coaches, so coaching school was about learning new things and bonding as a team. They went to lectures and clinics until 1, then went back to a conference room at the hotel. They ate a catered lunch, and Tim instructed them in offensive techniques, sets, and the playbook they would use at all levels, from 7th grade through varsity. After a break, his defensive coordinator and good friend, Bill Owens, who had been a very successful coach at the 5A level, trained the staff in the defensive techniques, sets, schemes, and stunts they would be using at all grade levels. At 5:30, they adjourned to the hotel bar for drinks, pool, and chatter. By the end of coaching school, they were all on the same page about coaching philosophy, how to treat kids, the nuances of the offense and defense, and they were friends. That mattered in the course of the long, stressful, high school football season in Texas. The logistics of a single father, who was also the head football coach and athletic director, taking care of 2 kids as well as his professional duties, were challenging. He had that conversation with the superintendent and board of trustees when they offered him the positions, but they were sure he would figure it out and do a great job. He wasn't so sure then, and he was less sure as the season approached. Jeannie also had teaching and dance team duties and responsibilities that tied her up for practice and varsity games, so he was struggling a bit. And then people began stepping up. Miss Beverly offered to keep the boys with her until he got off practice, as needed, if he would let them come home with her and eat with her family. Sharon and her sister both offered to babysit when needed, for away varsity games and Thursday night sub-varsity games, and they had a group of other babysitters they could call in if they were tied up. Sharon still looked at him with longing, but she accepted that he had a new woman in his life, and her life as a collegian was heating up. The grandparents and siblings suddenly took an interest in coming up and taking the boys to home games with them, and staying until Dad was through Saturday afternoon, which relieved a lot of pressure. Jeannie, of course, did everything in her power to be with them and keep them happy. She often picked them up and took them home. She cooked meals for them. She got them ready for bed if Dad wasn't there, and they drew ever closer to her. It wasn't ideal, but they made it work. It's been a few months, but based on her letters, Karen is doing much better. She is not only improving in mind, but body with the work regimen that her dad's friends put her on. She has been keeping in contact with the kids via secure line and a phone provided by the military. They talk every Wednesday and Friday, sharing what they did and how they miss each other. If things go well, she may be home before the year is up. Still, there are times she can't help but think and wonder what has happened. When Robin came back, her and Andy decided to find his kids. Her captain gave her all the time she needed to do to what she sacrificed. Andy tried for years but for nothing, but with Robin, they found the main. His son Robert 7 and daughter 10 were surprised at first, but ran to him in tears. His ex-wife used her own funds gained by fraud to hide them for so long. She was divorced and sentenced to 20 years. Ironic she was willing to make her kids grow up without a father due to her own selfish point reasons, only for her not to see her kids grow up herself. And by the time she gets out, they will want nothing to do with her. During their travels, however, Robin and Andy became close friends and eventually lovers. By the time Andy and Robin came back, most people would swear they were a family for years. Only a matter of time before talks of moving in together come to play. Janine went away from her thoughts as their destination was getting close. The most successful football season in 2 decades flew by. The only loss was a last-minute field goal to the district champions. That kept them out of the playoffs in those days of single representation, but the district champs won state by 3 touchdowns, so they felt pretty good about themselves after the disappointment faded. Given that they had 18 starters returning, including 9 on each side of the ball, the immediate future looked bright. Factor in that the JV, sophomore, and freshman teams won district and had only 2 losses among them, and that the junior high teams went undefeated, the longer-term future also looked bright. Meanwhile, Jeannie's dance team and the band scored ones at contest and finished top 5 at state, so she was feeling good too. Oh, they had a few sleepovers from time to time, but no hanky-panky. Jeannie loved the new house, but she joined the boys' campaign for a swimming pool for next summer, assuring Tim in private that she had some very nice bikinis he hadn't seen, but would if he had a pool surrounded by trees. They were circumspect, but they were fooling no one. The time they spent together at Tim's house, the looks they gave each other at school, and her relationship with the boys made it pretty clear that this wasn't some mutual support group. The kicker might have been Mark calling her mommy when he got sleepy at games and putting his head on her shoulder, which got a lot of oohs and ahs from the nearby spectators. It made Jeannie feel so good she sometimes wanted to cry. No one ever said anything to them, but they were accepted as a couple. Most thought they were drawn together by the untimely deaths of their spouses, but some knew about the problems with the poker game and Blizzard, and they were pleased they found each other in their pain. When invitations went out to parties, they each received one, and inevitably came together. Tim did his best to keep his intentions a secret, but when he asked for her hand in matrimony in front of her parents on Christmas Eve, no one, including Jeannie and the boys, was surprised. He called home to surprise his family, and Nate's comment was, "Oh, you're just getting around to that? We thought that was done months ago." "Oh yeah, football season. Well, brother, we have something to top that. You're going to be an uncle." Jan took the phone and added, "Twice over. Gary and I are having a girl, and so are Nate and Linda. Port Aransas did the trick, so keep next March open." Their early June wedding was held at the shed on the ranch. It was well attended anyway, by friends both local and from their school community 200 miles away. The Hildebrands priest, Father Jose, officiated a very traditional ceremony that included all the old language about love, honor, and cherish, forsaking all others, until death do us part. Both parties recited their vows loudly and clearly, backing away from none of the promises, and their first kiss as a married couple was the perfect blend of love and passion, or as much as could be shown in front of a crowd. They honeymooned at a remote location in the Caribbean and returned with all over tans. 9 months later, they had a blonde-haired baby girl they named Jana Marie. Their little boys made over her and loved on her almost from birth, and they became fierce and ferocious protectors of her for life. Even after another boy and girl joined their loving family over the next few years. Tim never got the soundproofing he wanted for every wall, but he did for the master bedroom. Jeannie got the kitchen, appliances, and bathroom she wanted. The boys and their mom got the swimming pool they wanted, and Tim got the state-of-the-art infrared and fiber optic security system he wanted. They all agreed that turned out to be their best buy. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.